They hugged each other tightly, expressing their feelings. The people around them stayed silent, taking in the sacred and beautiful bond of family. Watching this, Bickhoff suddenly realized something. The things he did for his children could end up hurting them. Clump replied, being a parent really is hard. He asked, isn't it tough for you raising your child alone? Bickhoff, his eyes filling with tears, trying to hide them so no one would see he was crying. He gave a brief look at his son, Ryan, who was also in tears. Ryan was moved by the deep love between Vincent and Shirone. Suddenly, Bickhoff said, I have heard that the Alfia's Magic Academy has special consideration for certain cases. Your father might be able to help with that. Clump asked in confusion, huh? What could an old man like me do? How can I convince that stubborn Alfias? Bickhoff responded, is it really impossible? I heard he owes you a favor. At that, Clump chuckled. Oh, for someone who follows every rule, isn't being stubborn the best approach? Bickhoff also laughed a little. He said, that's the same method I used to push you into becoming the family head. Clump hesitated slightly before replying, it was all for your own good. 3 days later, after Rian arrived at the Swordsmanship Academy, the family head allowed my family to stay in Ojin. He still feels guilty towards me. I don't know when he'll remember this again. Finally, Ryan and I had some free time, so we both made the most of it by sleeping next to each other. He looked so happy, grinning widely as he watched his friend lying next to him. He laughed so hard at my stories that he couldn't stop giggling. Then 3 days later, both of us had to leave home to go to the academy, where they would make their dreams come true. Shirone glanced back one last time. That's when we heard someone sobbing. It turned out to be Ryan crying loudly. Shirone spoke up, Ryan, don't cry. Ryan, in pain, said, why wouldn't I cry? As soon as I get on that bus, I'll be heading to the Magic Academy. We really have to say goodbye. The more he spoke, the louder he cried. Why can't I enroll next year like you? Shirone replied, I'm not even sure I'll be considered for special admission. We'll still meet during the holidays. Make sure you write me every day. Unexpectedly, Ryan placed his hand on Shirone's shoulder and shouted his name firmly, Shirone. With all his strength, Ryan yelled, you have to become a mage. I'll become the strongest knight to protect you. I promise. Before he could finish, Raina punched him hard in the head. Just focus on graduating first. I'm the one who worries about you the most. Then she turned to Shirone and said, Shirone, don't worry about anything. Enjoy your time with your family. That guy will definitely help you get into the academy. Shirone softly replied, okay, thank you for helping me. He placed his hand on his chest and bowed deeply to express his sincere gratitude. Raina smiled and thought to herself, what a strange kid. At first, I thought he was just a cute boy, but he's also so considerate. He even managed to stay confident in such a scary situation. Raina suddenly looked at Shirone, then spoke again. Shirone, maybe when you graduate, but she trailed off, falling silent. She thought, what am I thinking? He's just a kid about to enter a completely new world, the Magic Academy. Then Raina stepped forward, placed her hand on Shirone's shoulder and said, no, just do your best. You'll definitely become a great wizard. Shirone responded, please take care of Raina. After that, she helped Ryan onto the carriage, then turned and waved a farewell to Shirone. Shirone climbed into the carriage where her parents were already sitting, feeling excited and full of anticipation. The horses started moving and the two carriages headed in opposite directions, gradually drifting apart. As he sat inside, he suddenly heard a loud voice calling from outside, Shirone. He quickly stuck his head out to see who it was. It was Ryan Ojin. He was shouting to Shirone, when you get to the Magic Academy, make sure you outdo those guys. Hearing that, Clump couldn't help but laugh out loud. Then Shirone Arian shouted back just as loudly in response, saying to you. And that was how the meeting between these two passionate young men came to be remembered as the start of an event that would disrupt the entire continent's balance. Below the sidewalk, there was a nest of baby birds. The mother bird flew in, perched beside them for a moment, and then took off into the sky, soaring above the grand castles with their majestic architecture. This was the Alfia's Academy of Magic. A man was setting down a teacup on the table. It was Clump. He gave a tired, forced smile and spoke up. He had been thinking for 30 minutes already. The answer was probably yes, right? Alfia's responded, though we've been good friends for 50 years, I truly can't accept your proposal. Clump, hearing that, yelled out in frustration, what did you say? Do you have any idea how hard it was for me when we were younger because of you? Alfia's explained that this seemed to be quite a serious matter, which was why he had to say those empty words. However, the special consideration he was asking for wasn't just a backdoor option for nobles. Each year there were many requests, but this particular one had its own set of strict standards. The more Clump listened, the more irritated he became, scowling and cursing under his breath at this cunning old man who had made him wait 30 minutes for nothing. Then Clump burst out laughing. This time's different. He's a bit surprised. It really is important, huh? It's been a while since I've seen that expression on your face. Clump grinned mischievously and continued, I never said you should take in someone useless. It should be the opposite. The kid is the grandson of my youngest, and he's really smart. Do you know what I thought when I first met him? He became serious and said, I honestly thought I was looking at you when you were young. Alfia took a sip of tea, then raised a question. If he's so talented, why didn't he just enroll in school like everyone else? There has to be something off about that. Clump, still maintaining a serious tone, explained, Oh, there's definitely something wrong. He's not from a noble family. At that, Alfia exclaimed, causing Clump to jump in surprise. No way. Then Alfia described Shirone's exact appearance, a fat child with blue eyes. Clump remembered Shirone's earlier words, Even if I lose my life, I won't regret becoming friends with you. He commented, That was my first impression of him. He's got a sharp tongue, no doubt. He added seriously, I thought he was just a smart kid who knew how to manipulate adults. But after I suggested adopting him, Shirone shot back, If you've asked me to deny my origins, it's like telling me to go seek my own death. Just recalling that made Clump burst out laughing and cover his face. Was it really reasonable? Who would ever refuse to become a noble? Alfia gently stroked his mustache and said he understands the natural law of cause and effect. Clump replied, That's right. Without a cause, there can be no result. However, not everyone understands this rule, and many easily lose themselves. A new opportunity can come at any time, but the moment someone rejects their roots, they lose everything and can no longer decide what they believe is right. Does that remind you of yourself when you were younger? Alfia was silent for a moment, not responding right away. After a while, he spoke, The fact that they refuse to compromise means that others may agree with what they believe is right, but those same people could also judge them. That's what I find dangerous. Clump, sitting across from him, clicked his tongue, then gently asked, You still can't forgive yourself, can you? You've done everything you could. You've taught so many talented people. Isn't it time to forgive yourself? Alfia laughed and said, Forgive myself. That would be too arrogant. He then looked out the window and confided, The reason I teach children is to make sure there isn't another person like me in the world. With a sorrowful expression, he continued, Even I'm not sure that if the child is like you say, he won't end up walking down the same terrible path I once did. Clump, hearing this, spoke up. He had once been a genius, Alfia's a once-in-a-century talent. He continued, I, who was once seen as the light of the Manhwa family, went down the wrong path just once and almost lost everything. But in the end, I came back. Of course, who would have thought I'd end up as the headmaster of a school in such a remote place? Alfia teased Clump. What are you talking about? Guess the heavens were on your side. A useless kid like you became a third-rate swordsman. I'm really worried about the future of the Fornia kingdom. The two of them laughed heartily. Suddenly, Alfia stood up and walked over to the window, gazing at his school. If there's no cause, there's no result. Clump poured more tea into his cup and said, Is this fate? Who would have thought you'd know that kid? The boy who was cast out 4 years ago has come back. He laughed. I don't believe in fate. But then he thought to himself, however. Alfia thought about Chiron, a talented kid whose potential had been buried by social barriers, wandering for 4 years and now standing right in front of him. Was this really fate? Finally, he decisively declared, I will accept Chiron. 3 years later in the spring, a carriage was driving toward the small house deep in the forest. Chiron had finished preparing from his hair to his clothes and called out loudly, Mom, Dad. Chiron Arian, 17 years old this year, smiled excitedly and said, I'll be back soon. His mother hugged him tightly, showering him with praise. My sweet child, I'll miss you so much. Chiron promised, I'll write often, but do you think my hair looks okay? I've never styled it like this before, so it feels a little strange. She replied, Lady Rana says short hair is popular on the nobility these days. Just act like yourself. Vincent, standing nearby, cleared his throat a few times, a little embarrassed, and said, Did you forget something? Chiron waved him off. Dad, I'm 17 now. A kiss would be... kind of. He immediately responded, Hey, if you're not going to do it, then I will. Chiron let out a yell, and Vincent gently kissed his young son on the forehead, filled with endless love. Then he softly pulled him into an embrace, expressing the heartfelt emotions of a father. Chiron, I'm so proud of you. Chiron really enjoyed the warmth of that moment. Afterward, Chiron asked, But is it really okay? Didn't the head of the family say he would give me a house? Vincent answered seriously, Oh my, you really? Your father is a hunter, right? A hunter's home is the forest and the fields. Chiron froze, thinking to himself, Is that really true? He was walking me to the carriage when he said, Even though your father has refused the support the Ochin family offered you, they are still determined to give it to you out of goodwill. Chiron thought to himself, This was supposed to be a happy day for the village since I was about to attend the Magic Academy, but my father still hadn't told anyone. I'm sure the reason he rejected the offer to live in the city was because he didn't want to be a reason for anyone to pressure me. Chiron was already waiting outside and said respectfully, "Please get in the carriage. We'll escort you for the academy." Chiron climbed into the carriage and stuck his head out the window, shouting, "I'll be back soon." And that's how my first day at the academy began, with the carriage slowly pulling away. Behind me, a couple waved goodbye to their child, who was off to follow their dreams and learn how to grow up. Inside the carriage, it was just Shirone and Tamaran, making the atmosphere a little awkward. When they arrived, Tamaran opened the door and called out to Shirone, "Young master, we've arrived." He helped Shirone step down and his face showed clear surprise and awe. He continued, "At Alfia's academy, it's very busy right now with people coming and going, making the whole area feel lively. The school's gates are tall and grand, looking very majestic." Tamaran added, "The cost of your learning materials will be covered by me, young master. All you need to do is focus on your studies." Chiron was deeply grateful and said, "Thank you, Mr. Tamaran, for accompanying me." He replied seriously, "I'm just doing my job." Chiron gently lowered his head, expressing his feelings with sincere words. He felt that this was the first real chance he had to thank the man. He knew that his presence here was all because this person had valued him. "I won't forget what you've done for me," he said. Chiron smiled as he finally spoke the words he had kept inside for so long. But suddenly, something the man said caught him off guard. No matter how talented an ordinary person is, they will always be just an ordinary person. They can never be better than a noble. Facing him was Tamaran's stern, darkened expression. But then, he shared his thoughts honestly. However, not everyone is given this kind of opportunity. After you join the academy, many nobles will not take kindly to you. He smiled and offered some advice. But you must persevere. If you can stick it out until the end, everything will work out. Chiron, deeply moved, responded, "Thank you. I will definitely become a magician." Tamaran nodded. "Now, if you're ready, follow me. We need to get you registered for school." With that, the two of them walked deeper into the academy. As Chiron walked beside him, he thought to himself, "The Alfia's Mage Academy, a place known as the Cradle of Geniuses. What will I learn here and who will I meet?" Inside, the guards all said in unison, "We will serve with all our hearts." Bowing, the people on the school grounds were arriving to pursue their dreams just like Chiron. After completing the necessary procedures, Tamaran gave him a few final instructions. "I'm heading out now. If you need anything, just get in touch with me." Chiron replied, "Yes, thank you so much." But then he glanced around thinking to himself, "Who will come to pick me up? Should I take a walk while I wait? And where should I go?" Suddenly, he noticed several long signs posted on the wall. Alfia's Academy operates based on a system of 10 levels, with a total of 420 students, 30 of whom are in the graduation class. Every year, the number of students who graduate is... Chiron blinked in surprise, wide-eyed. "Is that all?" Just then, someone approached and spoke up. "So, you must be Chiron?" He quickly turned around and immediately bowed respectfully. "Hello, principal." Alfia's laughed and said, "We've met before. Do you remember me?" Chiron responded, "Thank you so much for that time." The older man patted Chiron on the back and said, "It's all right. We can talk as we walk." Alfia's announced, "You'll need to take an entrance exam." Chiron was stunned because he hadn't studied at all. "An exam? But I don't know anything." Alfia's reassured him, "Don't worry, it's just a few simple tests to place you." Tamaran asked, "Can you enter the spirit realm?" He replied, "Yes." Hearing that, Alfia's was truly impressed. "Oh, that's impressive." He thought to himself, who knew he could enter the spirit realm on his own? If only I had started teaching him when he was younger. I should have recognized this talent right in front of me. It's a bit late now, but I'll still teach him the basics. The entrance exam hall would be filled with 10-year-old children, so if they arrived too early, Shiro might be embarrassed. So Alfia's made a suggestion, "Would you like to take a walk around the school?" The two of them walked into another area, where a younger boy was reading 3 floating books in the air. As the boy passed by, Shiro noticed something strange passing him by. He stammered, "Huh, what was that, principal?" Alfia's explained, "This is the classroom where students study." Shiro looked up, impressed. "It's the freshman class. From class 18, this is the introductory class." Class 18 had many children flying around and using magic. Chiron stood below, still amazed. The children were laughing and playing, passing books around, and some were even gathering to play games and eat snacks. Chiron excitedly looked around and exclaimed, "Everyone is using magic." Alfia's replied, "That's right, but the place we need to go to is a bit different. Let's keep going to the advanced class 74. It's very quiet there. Everyone is focused on their studies, not fooling around." Chiron silently observed, "The atmosphere is different. Everyone here is about my age, but what are they so passionately discussing?" A boy with black hair spoke up. A large amount of magical power can lower the temperature to the freezing point. Wouldn't it be more effective to freeze the coolant instead? Although the downside is that the reaction will happen faster. How about this? What if we adjust the time instead of the magic? Shirone was startled, almost wanting to scream, "What?" He was struck by a painful realization. Why can't I understand what they're saying, even though we're speaking the same language? Suddenly, there was a loud explosion from behind. A girl emerged from the smoke, coughing with each breath. When she saw Alfia, she quickly bowed and said, "Ah, hello, headmaster." He smiled and said, "All right, seems like there are some issues here." The red-haired girl wearing glasses responded, "Yes, sir. I'm experimenting with a method to amplify sound, but something went wrong with the results." Shirone quietly wondered, don't they even care? Alfia's commented, "It seems like there's a bit of imbalance between the input and output. Let's check if the current is balanced." She eagerly gave a thumbs up. "Thank you, principal. I'll redo it." Shirone was completely surprised. The principal didn't even stop her. And she's planning to try again? Shirone looked around with a confused and amazed expression. It's like I'm in a completely different world. As they continued exploring, a girl with long, flowing red hair passed by. It was Amy, a stunning young woman who made the boys nearby stare at her in awe. The two of them moved on to another room. Something caught Shirone's attention. Is this a bulletin board? On the wall was a large yellow board covered in writing. He looked at it and thought to himself, this shows the rankings for the entire intermediate class. The top one is Karmas. Isn't she from one of the highest noble families, specifically Amy Karmas? He stood there, frozen in disbelief. All the names listed here had talents like his own, but she was the one at the top. A feeling of longing grew in his heart. I won't be like that. I'll start over from right here. Shirone's eyes sparkled with a glimmer of hope for the future. Something inside him pushed him forward. He had to change his rank. Suddenly, a voice called out from behind. "Hey, Amy, wait for me." The call made Shirone curious, and he turned to look. He couldn't help but wonder, is that Amy Karmas, the number one in the intermediate class? Then something made him stop in his tracks when he saw the red-haired girl. Her face brought back dark, terrifying memories from his past. It was when a group of thugs grabbed him by the shirt. They were bullying and beating up others, and the leader of the gang was Amy. Back then, she had been like a little demon, pointing right at his face and demanding, "Where did you learn this magic? Why would a commoner like you?" Back in the present, Amy just walked past him without saying a word, but she unexpectedly glanced over at Shirone. He quickly turned his face away. Then, a girl with orange hair ran up from behind, shouting, "Amy, I told you to wait. You're such an idiot." Chiron lowered his head, silently praying over and over in his mind, "Please don't notice me. Please." And with that, the two girls walked on past him. The girl with orange hair looked back excitedly and said, "Do you see that? The guy we passed earlier, he's really handsome. Is he a new student? But he doesn't look like one." She paused, then wondered, or maybe he's a transfer student. Amy responded, "That's interesting. I think I've met him before, actually." The girl with orange hair suddenly exclaimed, "What? You're interested in him? But you don't even like guys." "Is that so?" she shot back. "No, that's not what I meant. He just looks really familiar," Amy explained. Not satisfied with that answer, the girl shouted, "Don't lie to me. You like him, don't you?" Amy firmly denied it. "No, I didn't say that." She was Amy Karmas, a top-level student in the middle school class and the most famous girl in her grade. She had turned down many confessions from seniors, classmates, and other students. She was a model student, one of the best of the best. But the only person who knew about her dark past was someone trying to get into the school. Alfia asked, "Are you cold?" Shirone shivered and replied, "No, I'm fine." The third testing location of the Magic Academy was a building with solid, impressive architecture. Both of them entered inside. Alfia spoke up, "Oh, looks like it's not over yet." He leaned towards Shirone and said, "Well, this is interesting. Pay close attention to what that kid is doing." In the center of 3 circles full of magical symbols stood a child with brown hair with the judges above them. Alfia shared some information with Shirone. When you enter the spiritual field, you'll see that the symbols on the walls will change. The way you perceive them will help us understand the size, strength, flexibility, and tendencies of the field. He continued, "So all you need to do is answer the professor's questions honestly." Shirone replied, "Yes, sir." His heart was filled with excitement. This is fascinating. One of the judges sitting above called out, "So, Kami, can you use magic?" The child answered, "Yes, I can." A boy demonstrated his ability. "I can lift objects into the air." The judge praised him. "Well, that's adorable. Good job. Now try entering the spiritual field." Kenny replied, "Yes, sir." The boy closed his eyes and announced, "I'm in." Judge Dad asked, "Which number is the farthest?" The boy answered, 6. A professor smiled and asked again, 6. Alfia's explained the number 6 refers to the diameter of the area, which is 6 meters. Shirone quickly absorbed the information and said, got it. A brown-haired man then asked, which color looks the strongest to you? Kami replied, red. I feel like I'm entering a red world. The man took note, associating the color with light and fire. This indicated that the person tended to be very active. Then, Alfia's explained, this kind of divergence means her domain is much stronger than her age. A female professor asked, do you see the giant tower? Kami answered, it's on the left. Next, another judge asked, how do you feel about the temperature? The boy replied, it's a bit hot. I'm already sweating. When everything was finished, she said, well done. Kami, praised for her efforts, happily ran off. Female judge Sena remarked, this year's new students are truly impressive. The person sitting next to her smiled and said, yes, that student's domain size is 12 meters. It seems the quality of students has been improving every year. Finally, they wrote a comment. Overall assessment, good use of domain, but endurance is slightly lacking. Then they called out the next name, next Chiron Aryan. Alfia's patted Chiron on the shoulder, smiling as he said, show them what you can do. He smiled back and replied, yes, I'll do my best. Judge Thad, watching from above, rubbed his chin and thought to himself, so, this is the child who went through the special test the headmaster mentioned. The person beside him also murmured to themselves, that's quite an unusual choice, but he's already a bit older. He's using the name of a noble family. Isn't his family famous? The official papers listed Shirone Aryan, age 17, as a guest of the nobility. It seemed like she had discovered her talent a little late. Seeing Shirone, the person thought, well, she does look unique, but in this school, she'll likely be overshadowed quickly. Judge Thad spoke up and asked, Shirone Aryan, can you use magic? Shirone answered, no, I can't. I've never been taught. He responded, I see. But even if you haven't been trained, you should still be able to do something right. Alfia's furrowed his brow slightly. This was what they would think. Magic was an act of bringing knowledge from the mind. Nobles were taught many different things, and so they could naturally use magic. But this child had no knowledge at all. Judge Thad then said, all right then, step into the circle and show us your abilities. The man asked, can you tap into your spiritual energy? Shirone hesitated and replied, I'll try. The 3 judges let out a collective sigh of relief. Thank goodness, looks like this isn't a severe case of domestic abuse. Shirone slowly began to access his spiritual realm, and a blue light appeared around him. A beam of light descended from above and touched the top of his head. The symbols around him began to move and float in the air. He opened his eyes to take it all in, amazed by the sight. So, this is what it's like, he thought. Thad spoke up, asking a familiar question. Now, Shirone, tell us the farthest number you can see. Shirone paused, not responding, which made the man call out again, Shirone. The brown-haired woman smiled and said, looks like he's embarrassed. Alfia's, standing outside, called out, Shirone, please answer. We won't judge you. We're just trying to figure out the best way to educate you. Still hesitating, Shirone finally explained his current situation. I can see a number, but it's so long I can't read it. Thad was confused. You can't? It's not about sight, it's about feeling it. Shirone clarified further, no, that's not it. I can feel it, but it's just too long, and it keeps growing longer even now. Thad sighed, thinking, this really is. He frowned and said, then let's start with the first few numbers you can actually see. Chiron focused, slowly looking at the results. In his field, it was extremely long, and he saw the number 3415 with one more digit after it. He rounded it off to a single number and replied, 3.14. Thad was startled. What did you say? Sena, looking very concerned, said, Chiron, we didn't include 3.14 in the data. Are you sure you did make a mistake? He frowned and answered, is that so? But that's what I see. She thought for a moment. Really? Well, there were cases where pi shows up. That means the size of the area must have exceeded the range we set. Can he really see up to 30 meters? The woman with brown hair asked, so, which color do you see as the strongest? Chiron glanced around and answered, it's blue. Definitely blue. Once again, the professors exchanged surprised looks. If it really is blue, then doesn't that mean it's a type of convergence? But his field is still this large. A convergence field is better than the size of the area, the opposite of divergence. Alfia, standing nearby, was equally stunned. Ah, now I understand why you're so determined about this, but this isn't just a good talent. He stared wide-eyed, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. They had written convergence in his file and continued on. Both professors asked in unison, how many numbers are floating around? Shirone looked up within his domain and silently thought, is he asking about this? There's no need to count each one. When I can feel it, there are so many bright, glowing dots in here. He answered decisively 857. Upon hearing this, the man was so surprised that his face froze. He stammered 867, then shakily wrote it down on paper. Density 86.7%. Outside, Alfia stayed silent, his face suddenly serious. This is dangerous. Judge Saina gently pushed up her glasses with a cautious look in her eyes. She regained her composure and continued with the test. Shirone, how cold do you feel right now? He heard the question and responded, pretty cold to the point where I'm freezing. She wasn't surprised and wrote it down, just as expected. She then noted the overall assessment, convergence and defense with exceptional durability. His domain size is unusually large. The brown-haired woman smiled and complimented him. Well done. Now we have a meeting to decide which class you'll be placed in. So all new students, please wait outside. Chiron followed her instructions, turning around and heading out with the other children. He walked ahead, slowly opening the door and waiting for the rest to step out before him. Then, the door was finally closed. As soon as it shut, the room burst into chatter. Such an interesting student. How can a 17-year-old have a domain with a diameter of over 300? The density of the domain increases with its size, but his domain density is 86.7%. The elderly professor said, above all, it's pure concentration without any enhancement skills. Could he be some monk training nonstop on a mountain or something? Suddenly, Thad spoke up, stopping everyone from discussing further. What if he's lying? He smiled with a look of disdain. Think about it. A domain with 90% density and a 30-meter diameter coming from a 17-year-old who doesn't even know what magic is? It's a bit hard to believe. Is it possible he inflated the numbers before telling us? Santa frowned and replied, but sir, it seems like you've forgotten that there's no reason for new students to lie. If they got into a higher level class with numbers like that, they wouldn't be able to keep up with the rest of the class, not to mention taking tests. What kind of student would dare lie to a teacher when coming to school? Above all, it seems some of the teachers had forgotten that P was displayed as an error code. Shirone was sitting there, awkwardly laughing along with the kids. She continued, that's not something a regular student would say just to get attention. Thad clicked his tongue in frustration. Suddenly, Alfia stepped forward and asked, then where would be a good place to put him? I mean, Shirone. She stood up quickly. Principal. Saina Oliver, a level 6 mage, spoke up. The 6th year class studies the development of magical domains and the theories behind them. The 5th year class is where they start learning real magic, right? I think this student's domain is almost fully developed. Based on that, I recommend placing him in the 5th year class. Thad firmly responded, I disagree. This made her even angrier. Thad, a level 6 mage, then voiced his opinion. He's a 17-year-old who knows nothing about magic. This could cause problems and make him arrogant if we put him in an advanced class. Right now, I think we should teach him the basics. Saina bluntly replied, that might be true, but not every student is like you, Mr. Thad. He shouted angrily, what? The two of them immediately began to argue. Thad yelled, come on, you just want to put him in the 5th year because you're in charge of that class and you want him there. Saina retorted, what's wrong with wanting to teach such a talented student? A brown-haired professor spoke up. Mr. Thad makes a good point. Even if he has great talent, he's still just a young student. What if we start by teaching him step by step in the 10th year class? The nearby professor sighed wearily. Well, here we go again. The woman with brown hair gently said, he might lose motivation if we send him to the basic class because of his age. What do you all think about postponing the class placement and keeping an eye on him? The elderly professor spoke up, I think 7th grade would be suitable. 7th grade is an advanced class that still includes basic lessons in the field. If the child is that talented, skipping a grade could also be an option. Alfia stroked his chin and replied, as expected, what you said is true. Without hesitation, he immediately decided that Shirone would be placed in 7th grade. The Magical Academy has a system with 10 levels of classes. Based on assessments, students are placed in one of these 10 levels. However, these classes can be grouped into 3 main categories. Classes 10 to 8 are the basic levels, where students are taught with a focus on developing their fields. Classes 7 to 4 are advanced, where students learn to use their magic and fields. Finally, the graduation classes made up of levels 3 to 1 are intense and rigorous, training students to become professional mages. The next morning at the large and impressive Alfia's Academy, a young man with a 7th grade emblem on his chest arrived. He immediately drew the attention of the female students, who couldn't help but admire him when they saw him. Chiron, carrying a school bag in his hand, slowly walked into the classroom under the gaze of many eyes. The teacher in the class announced, today, our class has a new student. The girls in the back started whispering to each other. He was placed in the advanced class as soon as he enrolled. He seems pretty old, but he's so handsome. Shirone stood on the steps and gave a warm, bright smile as he introduced himself. I'm Arian Shirone. It's a pleasure to meet you. The whole class immediately buzzed with excitement like it was New Year's. There were claps, laughter, and happy chatter everywhere, mostly from the girls. They were all eager to welcome the new student. The teacher had asked for quiet to restore order. Chiron was in a great mood because his dream had finally come true. I finally made it to the Magic Academy. Alfia's Magic Academy. It spans the entire 75,425 kilometers of mountains, including the dorms. It has 33 buildings and 40 training centers. Although going outside was prohibited on non-weekends, it wasn't a big deal because most of the facilities were on campus. Classes ended at 5 p.m. At any time after that was free. However, students often went to the library, which was open 24/7, with a focus on connecting students with similar interests and satisfying their desire to learn. All of this created a prestigious environment. Chiron thought to himself, as expected, the classes are tough. There are so many subjects, all at an advanced level. This place is for nobles, people who've been learning since they were young and have been through a long, difficult journey with it. Because of this, he'd faced many obstacles. However, by using every possible method, he managed to keep up. Knowledge in the timeline of history has been deeply engraved in Chiron. All the knowledge of the world gradually started to accumulate within him. One beautiful morning, the teacher announced, "All right, class is dismissed for today. Great job, everyone." As Chiron closed his book, he thought to himself, the afternoon class was the practical combat class, but the schedule didn't mention the location. Looking around the classroom, he felt a bit awkward, unsure who to ask. Fortunately, there were a few people around his age. Chiron hesitantly approached and asked, "Hi, do you know which training facility we need to go to?" The girl he asked was caught off guard and jumped a little. "You're asking me?" Chiron thought to himself, she seems like a shy classmate. No wonder I'm the one who feels at ease. The girl responded, "You probably don't know yet. Today's practical class is at the Second General Training Center." Chiron asked, "General, what's that?" She explained, "All the intermediate level classes will train together for 2 weeks. Today is the orientation session." Hearing this, Chiron paused for a moment. Intermediate classes all together. Could it be? The scene shifted to the Second General Training Center. There were a lot of students entering the facility and the place was very lively. There was chatting, laughter, and greetings everywhere. "Hello, senior. Thanks for last time." "Hello. Senior, come sit here." They all said in unison, "Hello, Senior Amy." It turned out that the commotion was all because of her. Her close friend next to her also enjoyed some of the attention, waving back and greeting everyone. Chiron sat at the top, looking down and quietly thought to himself, being famous is really something. She's the type of person I'd avoid if I could. But she's got 2 training sessions every week. Even so, if she's been in the intermediate class from the start, she'll probably move up to the graduation class soon. The seniors are chatting away energetically, but there are still strict rules to follow. Chiron worriedly wondered, can I somehow stay invisible? Just then, a special instructor for the intermediate field class, Athela Romi, a level 6 mage, appeared and loudly announced, "Hello, everyone in the intermediate class. I'm Athela, and I'll be responsible for your field class again this year." She glanced around the room before continuing, unsure there are some students transferring into the class this new year, right? Though our class is full of well-known faces, quite a lot of them. Today, we have a new face joining the intermediate class. At this, everyone turned to look at Chiron. So the rumors were true? Who is it? Chiron could only laugh awkwardly, thinking to himself, wait, this is bad. Athela added fuel to the fire. Chiron, would you stand up and introduce yourself to the class? Chiron froze at her words, but still tried to comply. He swallowed nervously, trying to gather some courage. Meanwhile, Amy and her close friend were also drawn to the scene, glancing over at Chiron. He smiled and introduced himself. "Hello, I'm Arian Chiron, and I just started 7th grade. Nice to meet you." Before he could finish his sentence, the entire room erupted in applause to welcome him. Chiron stood frozen, as if about to faint, and said, "I don't know what to say anymore." His close friend, excited, spoke up, "Amy, is that the guy you saw yesterday? I think his name is Chiron." Amy, who seemed uninterested, thought to herself, "This is the first time I've heard his name. Who is he? He seems popular, though. I'm sure I should know people like that." Suddenly, a girl with brown hair spoke up, "Senior, do you know him? According to my sources, the teachers really pay attention to him." His close friend gasped, "Really?" The girl explained they said his scores were amazing when they tested him during the entrance exams. His friend responded, "Oh my gosh, I like him even more now. I wonder which rich family he's from." The casual question made Amy pause. Her eyes lit up and her hair seemed to whip around her face. It was as if something shocking had just come to her mind. She remembered a moment from the past when she and a few others had been caught in what felt like a whirlwind. Back then, she had stared directly at a boy outside and asked, "Where did you learn magic?" How could a commoner? The boy crying outside was none other than Shirone when he was younger. Back to reality, she was trembling, sweat dripping down her face, a forced smile appearing as she muttered, "Holy shit." The Karnas family was famous for their genius bloodline with the unique trait of red eyes passed down to every descendant. This gift allowed them to remember every moment they had ever seen with perfect clarity. An arrow was shot, hitting the bullseye with precision. Another arrow followed, splitting the first one cleanly in half, and that made all the learning seem pointless. The archer was a red-haired girl. Even though she hit the bullseye multiple times, she didn't seem happy at all. On the other hand, the butler standing next to her kept clapping and praising excellent miss. The red-haired girl was Amy, the youngest daughter of the family and the most talented of all of her siblings. Her father laughed loudly, "My daughter." He placed a chess piece on the board and said, "She's truly a Karmas descendant." Amy stayed silent, staring at the chessboard in front of her. The butler called out, "Miss." Her father asked, "What's wrong?" Amy stood up, her face cold. "Boring." Annoyed, she turned around and walked away, followed by a group of thugs. Amy fumed, thinking to herself, "I hate everything about this family. The family, the family, the family. What does my ability have to do with this name? I could do it on my own without needing this family's reputation." She followed the gang of thugs around, fighting wherever they went. Amy thought to herself, "I can do whatever I want." Watching the thugs fight, Amy sat with her legs crossed, feeling bored. This is so dull, she thought. But then something happened that made Amy stop and reconsider everything. She was stunned as she watched the thugs collapse around her, and a young boy stood in front of her, crying, tears streaming down his face. The one who made Amy rethink her entire perspective was a poor, pitiful boy. In the lecture hall, Chiron bowed his head to greet everyone. Amy watched the scene unfold, and her mouth dropped open in disbelief. "Oh my Dan." Suddenly, she heard a voice calling, "Amy, Amy." The brown-haired girl next to her stuttered, calling out, "Senior." They were clearly on different wavelengths. Amy quickly explained, "It's my shoes. They're uncomfortable." Amy thought to herself, "I knew it." The memory seen through her red eyes couldn't possibly be wrong. The person next to her asked, "Wait, what were we talking about again?" But Amy was lost in her own thoughts. "I thought he was a noble." She looked at Chiron and continued, "But who would have guessed he was just a commoner? How did he even get into this academy?" Her body shook with embarrassment. That part of her past was incredibly humiliating. Amy slapped her forehead. "I just want to die." Her eyes glazed over. I erased all the traces of that mischievous phase. There's no way he remembers that day, right? Amy recalled the memory from the previous year when she was squatting in front of a blonde-haired boy, his face still blurred with tears. Amy covered her mouth and mocked him, saying, "A slave doesn't have nails, right? Why don't we just cut them off?" A little while later, she stood behind, blushing, covering her mouth as she watched the thugs strip the boy of his clothes. What are they doing? Why are they taking his clothes off? Amy imagined how Shirone might talk about her to others. Senior Amy isn't who people think she is. In her imagination, Shirone waved her hand, saying, 5 years ago, she used to hang out with the thugs in those small alleys. Why would someone trusted by all the professors like me lie? That's not all, though. Shirone whispered to the others, "She's actually really into men. Listen, she even tried to strip me once and," Amy, furious, accidentally tore a page in front of her. She clenched her fists. "No, never. I can't let this rumor spread. I have to kill it before it even starts." Meanwhile, Shirone shuddered repeatedly. "Is someone watching me?" Professor Ithella Romy, a level 6 certified mage specializing in intermediate fields, stood at the podium and asked, "So, can anyone tell me exactly what the field is?" Someone answered, "It's the mental state of a mage." She nodded. "Yes, it's the awareness of a mage's mental state. The initial form of it is a sphere, because that's the easiest shape to focus on. The green of the domain reflected in Ithella's eyes, and through practice, we can learn to perceive it and change it as we wish." Ithella opened her domain and said, "I'll show you the domain's image." Shirone gasped. "I can see it now." Shirone focused intently on the blue image of the domain before her. She could actually see the professor's domain with her own eyes. The domain's range is 10 meters. Ithella explained, "This is the basic spherical form of the domain. But as I mentioned, in practice, the spherical form is rarely used." Ithella snapped her fingers. "Let me show you an example." A stone tablet appeared, floating in the air. Ithella said, "I'll use magic to target the object." Standing in the middle of her domain, Ithella's domain had a range of 10 meters, but the target was 20 meters away. She decided to use Fireball, a fire-based spell. Shirone excitedly covered her mouth. Finally, she would get to see magic in action. A small fireball appeared at the tip of Ithella's finger. She said, "First, I'll create a small flame." Athela controlled the fireball, watching to see if she could hit her target precisely. In an instant, the fireball shot forward, trailing flames as it sped toward the target. However, as it reached the edge of the domain's range, the fireball instantly fizzled out. Below, all the students who had been sitting before were left wide-eyed, their mouths hanging open as the flame disappeared. Athela smiled and explained, "As you saw, most magic can't leave the magic field, and so it can only maintain its shape while inside the field." She bent slightly and extended her hand, continuing, "However, if we expand the magic field, my spherical magic field immediately transforms into a straight line," she said, "like this, straight toward the target." Athela's small flame instantly destroyed the target. She turned to the students below and said, "This way, we can actually touch it." A wave of surprised and admiring cheers filled the lecture hall. Some older students started chatting among themselves. "Look at the shocked faces of those 7th graders, so cute." Shirone and her friends clapped, impressed by Athela's demonstration. He thought to himself, "I didn't know it was possible to do something like that. Is it really possible to change the shape of the magic field?" Then Athela continued, "But this method has a drawback." The students' faces showed a bit of disappointment. A boy raised his hand and asked, "Isn't that the right way to do it?" Athela brought up a projector screen beside her and pointed to it. Changing the shape of the magic field requires intense focus. In real combat, when your opponent can attack you in so many ways, constantly shifting the shape of your field isn't the best option. Athela pointed to the green screen displaying information about the energy field. She introduced, "So, people have classified the shapes of the energy field into 4 main types: defensive, offensive, targeting, and redirecting. These are the 4 main forms." She continued, "Let's start with the defensive type. The defensive shape is an octagon. It helps the energy field block most attacks." Athela's energy field instantly transformed into an octagon surrounding her. She explained, "The more sides it has in contact, the stronger the defense." With a wave of her hand, Athela changed the shape of the energy field again, this time into a star, also known as the offensive form. Based on its shape, it helps the user easily locate their target. The sharpest points show where it's aiming at the most targets. Athela changed the energy field shape, once more continuing her lesson. Next is the targeting shape, which is extremely effective in long-range combat. However, it's not as useful against fast-moving targets. In theory, that's true. But in practice, the distance between the tips and the center is quite large, so it's hard to rotate. Her voice remains steady. When using this form, is how quickly you can rotate it. A few students were talking among themselves. She could even use that technique without blinking. Does the professor think we can do that too? Unlike the others, Shirone was deep in thought with that method. It's possible to use a domain within a 10-meter range in real combat. Athela continued, "And finally, there's the type that redirects. It's not very popular because even 5th-year students struggle to use it well." Athela then said, "But I'll give you an example." Just then, a student behind Shirone spoke up, "If we can do that, doesn't mean we'll be able to move up to higher classes. I got a perfect score in domain in 8th grade. It's as easy as pie." Before the student could finish, the change beneath them left them speechless. The other students gasped, and even Shirone was startled. The students murmured, "The domain!" Down below, the green orb was slowly separating from Athela. Every student in the lecture hall shouted, "Is it separating from the professor's body?" Shirone was so excited she almost stood up. "I don't understand. A domain is a wizard's mental state. How can it be separated from the body?" Athela's domain gradually began to form into a stream. Shirone was curious, wondering what was inside it. What was at the center of that domain? Athela stood below, surrounded by the lines of the enchanted field, and said, "The directional shift form is extremely difficult to use. It's so hard that even mages struggle with it. But the strength of this form lies in the fact that the mage isn't the center of the field, so there's no limit to movement. Because of this, targeting with an instantaneous spell cast is no longer just a theory. It becomes possible since its range is unlimited. An instantaneous cast means the mage places the spell inside the directional shift form, and it automatically activates when it reaches the target." Hearing Athela speak, the students below gasped in surprise and whispered among themselves, "How can the professor do this?" She remained calm, as if it were second nature to her. Just stepping into the magical field was already a challenge. Shirone's girlfriend, standing behind her, responded, "She's on a whole other level. She's a level 6 mage, after all." Shirone stood frozen, her expression soft but hiding an extraordinary talent. Athela adjusted her glasses and said, "You'll be disappointed if we skip the practice during the first lesson, won't you? The top scorer in the fast target magic test will be crowned today." Before Athela even finished speaking, the students below began chattering excitedly, thrilled at the chance to practice. Athela called out, "Where's Amy from class 4? We'll start with the student representative." The girl sitting next to her best friend Amy said, "You're amazing, always the best in class." Her best friend turned to smile at Amy, teasing, "Here we go again. Amy really is a star." The male students couldn't help but fall for her the moment they saw her. She turned to look at Amy and saw the lost, dazed expression on her face. Her best friend stammered, finishing the sentence she had started. "Right, Amy?" Amy was sweating heavily. She really didn't want to be the center of attention right now. The first of the four forms in this field is the target form, and its advantage is a long attack range. However, it's a disadvantage against fast-moving targets and multiple targets. But if it's used by someone with an extremely high level of focus and control over the field at high speeds. Bang, bang. Two loud explosions rang out in quick succession. Amy swiftly countered and threw a few fireballs at the target. That weakness completely disappears and turns into an impenetrable fortress against distant enemies. The students sitting in the stands gasped in admiration. As expected of senior Amy, she's amazing. Normally, people who compete in rapid-fire shooting switch between the four forms, but senior Amy always comes in first, even when she only uses the target form. A student sitting next to Shirone muttered to themselves, "I wonder if I could ever become a mage like that." Shirone stared mesmerized. Even someone as inexperienced as her could tell how incredible Amy was. Shirone couldn't take her eyes off Amy's performance. The fireballs kept shattering targets, and not only was Amy skillfully shifting the field while standing perfectly still, but she was also able to strike all the targets that the field passed through. Amy was like a master of the arena, delivering another flawless move. Shirone sighed in awe. Amy's face was completely expressionless, and every movement exuded an air of grace and nobility. The sound of admiration rang out, "That's amazing." The student behind Shirone said, "If I were dating a senior like her, my school life would be completely different." The girl next to him laughed mockingly. "Dream on, she doesn't care about anyone. Don't forget her family, the Karma's clan." Shirone listened to their conversation and thought, "I can see why the guys go crazy for her now. She's not just from a noble family, she has everything." Shirone shifted her gaze down at Amy below. A perfect person. Then why is she hanging out with those street-level people? Down below, Amy finished her demonstration, bowing and using a quick spell to wrap things up. Her score was level 9 with a time of 205. The crowd around her burst into stunned applause. Suddenly, she looked up, locking her intense blue eyes onto one spot. Feeling that gaze, Shirone jumped startled. What were the students around her talking about? Senior Amy? No way. Someone shouted loudly, "Did she just look at the new student?" Amy, snapped out of it by the shout, immediately turned back to her spot. "Damn it, why am I looking at that kid?" Amy was frustrated, but she couldn't help it. It bothered her. Still, at least she had confirmed something. The students around her continued to gossip. Do they know each other? No way, he just transferred today. Shirone paled and thought, I get it now. But it wasn't just Shirone. Right now, Amy was thinking the same thing as him. Amy believed he missed her, and Shirone could tell that she missed him too. Amy thought to herself if he spread rumors about her past, it would be a huge problem. Looks like she really needed to silence him. But then she shook her head, trying to calm down. No, she reminded herself, stay calm. I'm the top student in the school. Just a few random words from someone like him. Why would anyone believe that? If I panic, it'll only make things worse. Her blonde friend rushed over, noticing something was off. Amy, is something wrong? Your face is all red. Amy quickly shook her head, rubbing her face. No, it's nothing. Then the practice session was split by class. The students moved downstairs. Athela spoke up. 7th graders will start with defensive techniques. You need to master defense first. She walked around teaching the students. After all, mages needed to stay focused if they wanted to survive on the battlefield. Shirone was standing alone, eyes closed, concentrating. She thought to herself that the trick was to imagine shrinking and condensing her consciousness. In her mind, she was visualizing a personal magic domain. First, she condensed it and formed a solid shape, then built the framework and ensured it wouldn't collapse. When Shirone thought to himself, I've succeeded, he suddenly froze. He looked at the image field in front of him and thought, no, it's not certain yet. Until it materializes, I can't be sure. It'll be easier if I can actually see the spirit field in the image. Shirone walked over to Athela and asked, excuse me, miss, may I use the image field? She was surprised. The image field? Athela looked around and then said, actually, the upper year students are the ones who get to use it first. Shirone followed her gaze, thinking to himself that there was no need to worry about others when learning magic. The opportunity for a person to truly improve doesn't always come around. At that moment, Athela turned back smiling and said, it looks like no one else is using it right now. All right, you can go ahead. She thought to herself, is it too much to have a student representative demonstrate? The people around them started murmuring. A new student? Interesting. So cute. A close friend raised her hand and called to Amy, Amy, look at that. The next thing her friend said made Amy choke on her drink. That student just entered the image field. Amy turned around and shouted loudly, causing her friend to jump. What the heck is he doing? What can a 7th grader even do? Her friend whispered, Amy, what's going on with you today? Is something wrong? I'm starting to get scared. Everyone's attention shifted to the image field. Shirone stood alone in the middle of it, and the board behind him showed the words, Image field range 0 meters. Shirone stared straight ahead, and at last he saw it. A green sphere surrounded him, and he saw it with his own eyes. My spirit field. The group of students around her was immediately startled. What's up with that size? The range on the measurement board kept changing. Shirone looked up, thinking to herself, did they even tell me the size of my field when I took the entrance test? If the teacher heard this, they'd definitely say something. No, we couldn't even measure it, someone answered. Shirone raised both her hands. Then how much bigger can it get? As she watched her field expand more and more, panic started to rise inside her. She screamed inwardly, stop. The measurement board now showed field range, 20 meters. Some 5th graders mumbled in shock. Is she really in 7th grade? Isn't the average size for 7th graders only 13 meters? Whispers and chatter filled the air. Are you sure she's not just making it seem bigger? If so, the density would drop so much it'd be like a balloon. Shirone was sweating heavily. Okay, that's enough. Phew, I'm getting too much attention here. Now she was preparing to switch to a defensive stance. Suddenly, Shirone froze. What is this? Shirone looked at the field in front of her and thought, why isn't the frame being lifted? It's collapsing instead. But everything was fine during practice earlier. Amy, standing in the 4th area, stared in disbelief and said, there's no way it would work perfectly on the first try, right? Shirone was wondering to herself, where did I go wrong? Is it because I saw it with my own eyes that I got scared? No, my ability to focus shouldn't be affected by something like that. She focused, trying to reason it out. I need to figure out what went wrong. What's the difference between the inside and outside of the field? There has to be something. Suddenly, a realization flashed in Shirone's mind like a droplet rippling the still surface of a lake. I get it now. She remembered that when Athela stood in the field earlier, she had misjudged the situation because Professor Athela had made it look too easy. If I want to change the field, I need to focus. So even the intention to shrink my field also requires focus. Shirone took a deep breath, pulling herself together. If the thought of shrinking my field is what caused this, she opened her eyes wide and focused. Then she said, so I just need to keep it at a normal size. Shirone had just finished speaking when the range of his domain started to expand. The students around him stared in shock. What? It's even bigger now? The domain kept growing, and Shirone's eyes were filled with determination as the number on the range meter continued to climb. Amy watched this with a twitching smile at the corner of her mouth. What the hell? The entire hall was almost entirely covered in green. All the students around had to look up with their mouths open. The number on the range meter had reached 41 meters. The whole hall erupted in a shout. It's huge! Looking at the domain in front of him, someone shouted in fear. What the hell is this? What kind of domain is that so big? Shirone raised both hands, focused his thoughts, and now he didn't need to command one side separately. He stared at his own hands. I'll shrink it all down at once. Shirone's domain instantly shrank and solidified into firm, flat planes. Some older students nearby couldn't help but marvel. That new student is really something. They watched as Shirone stood inside his domain, and the whole group immediately began whispering excitedly. He did it! It's only the first day, and he's already pulled this off. Even Shirone was surprised by his own domain. He reached out and touched the domain, feeling like he was standing inside a giant gemstone. Athela, standing nearby, adjusted her glasses, equally amazed. She thought to herself, while the superior convergence qualities of this defensive type certainly helped, to succeed on the very first day is incredible. I heard he even impressed the teachers during the entrance exam. The girl with orange hair turned to Amy and said, it looks like the rumor about him catching the attention of all the teachers is true, huh? What do you think, Amy? Amy's expression was terrifying. Her best friend was also shocked. Amy thought, how could I forget? Thoughts about the past involving Shirone kept swirling around in her head. That kid is the reason I was humiliated. He probably traveled a long way to get here. Looks like someone's backing him up. She stared at Shirone in the picture and thought, sooner or later, he'll bridge the gap between the classes. Then his popularity will just keep growing. Amy made up her mind. Time to change the plan. I need to approach him secretly. Professor Athela was also surprised. She's especially talented in being versatile, almost like she's spent her whole life training on a mountain. Shirone said, Professor, its size has been reduced quite a bit. Athela nodded. That's right. The size is smaller, but the hardness of the field will increase. At this level of hardness, most physical impacts won't be able to break your field. Plus, the hardness will give you some resistance against mental magic attacks. After explaining, Athela continued, "Great job, you could Noji, chew the field." The field around Shirone slowly disappeared, and he said, "Thank you, teacher." At that moment, the hall erupted with cheers. Students from various classes kept praising Shirone. "Well done, new student. Congratulations." Shirone was startled. "Why is everyone looking at me like this?" He awkwardly said his thanks and quickly ran away from the center of attention. "Thank you, everyone." Athela smiled as she watched Shirone. She thought to herself, "I understand how he was able to perfect that defense form. He has a strong ability to gather power and an unusually large field, so it's no surprise that he succeeded in executing it." Athela observed Shirone's shy expression as he received all the attention. "I need to keep an eye on him." At that moment, countless gazes were focused on Shirone, but not all of them were the same. A group of people was discussing Shirone. "He'll probably join our class soon, right? That talent is truly impressive." Then there were competitive glances or some girls murmuring, "Wow, impressive. It's only his first day, and already you can see the admiration and affection in their eyes." There was also jealousy and envy. And finally, in the very back, Amy stood watching Shirone with a frightening gaze. The next day at the academy, there was one more pair of eyes in the classroom. A woman with purple hair, tied up in a bun, was about to step in, casting a curious glance toward Shirone. As the door swung open, the classroom immediately buzzed with noise when they saw who had entered. It was Professor Sena. "Professor, could you tell us about your first love?" one student asked. Shirone also saw the person who had just entered. The woman's cold, serious gaze swept over the class from the front. The students whispered among themselves. Shirone recognized her. This was the intimidating professor who had given the entrance exam lecture, Sena Oliver. What Shirone didn't know, however, was that she was the professor in charge of Class 5. So other students were excited. "Wow, this is amazing. Who would have thought that we, a Class 7 group, would get to hear a lecture from her? But there must be a reason a Class 5 professor like her is teaching a Class 7 class." Sena, growing more frustrated by the second, muttered to herself, "Professor Thad is such a pain. If you put someone with that kind of talent in a Class 5, they'd figure out how to keep up with the others anyway." She adjusted her glasses. She had come to this class because she wanted to teach Shirone herself. In her mind, she thought, "I'll have you move up as quickly as possible, and you will definitely be one of my students." Shirone flinched and stared ahead. "I think she just looked at me," he thought. "Maybe I'm overthinking it." The student sitting in front of Shirone spoke up loudly. "Since this is the first lesson, could you tell us a story?" Another student jokingly asked, "Is it true that you're dating Professor Thad?" Sena didn't say anything, but her frown clearly showed her disgust. She raised her hand, and a small chunk of ice appeared instantly in her palm. The ice block was as beautiful as crystal. Sena asked the class, "Can anyone here explain the theory behind this magic?" On the glass door next to Shirone, a thin layer of frost had formed from the cold. Sena's voice remained calm. "What is cold air?" Even the ceiling of the classroom had gathered ice crystals as the temperature dropped. Sena continued with her questions. "And what is the process of freezing?" Some students shivered and wrapped their arms around themselves, stuttering, "Professor, it's so cold." Sena calmly explained, "The cold you're feeling is because you lack energy." She directed the small ice block in her hand downward, but in this world, there was no concept of thermal energy. Therefore, temperature could only increase infinitely and could never decrease infinitely. The ice block in Sena's hand suddenly shattered. She explained, "When energy reaches 0 degrees, we call it absolute zero." Sena smiled and added, "If we mix in a bit of energy from this room, we can easily create something like this ice sample. But what happens if we break it into tiny pieces and create a convection current?" The shattered ice pieces fell to the ground. Sena answered her own question. "The answer is, we could create temperatures cold enough to kill someone, like what you've all just experienced." The students, both terrified and speechless, thought, "So, are we going to die?" Sena turned her back and walked toward the podium. "So the question here is, how can a wizard absorb that energy?" She picked up a piece of chalk, wrote something on the board, and looked down at the class before continuing. Without any tools or devices, how could they activate magic like that? Shirone focused on Sena. She drew a circle on the board, symbolizing the domain of the wizard, and said, "A wizard controls the world within their domain. Of course, this control is limited to a certain area, but within that space, the wizard is like a god." Sena's voice was steady. "And if you want to affect the senses, you can create light, sense, or even physical sensations. This is a wizard's special ability, allowing them to dominate reality. But even with such divine abilities," Sena paused for a moment. She tapped the chalk against the board. "What if they don't even know what abilities they have?" She raised her voice. "For a wizard to activate magic, they need to fulfill certain conditions, and those are omniscience and omnipotence." The 7th grade students below listened in awe as Sena continued. Wizards activate magic based on their omniscience and omnipotence. No matter how powerful you are, without knowledge, you can't activate magic. Sina's words seem to awaken Shirone. That's why, aside from those with special senses, most mages study the world like scholars. Shirone also realized something. That's why I can't use magic. He remembered how he used to protect himself. He thought, I have no understanding of magic in its entirety, so I only train in the basics. Sina continued, you'll be learning countless subjects at this school. Magic theory is just half of what makes up magic itself. She smiled and added, if you don't work hard, you can't become a true mage. After the introduction, Sina began the first lesson of the day. Now let's start. Basic chemistry. Yes, Professor. Shiro made up his mind that he could do it. His eyes seemed to say, I can become a mage. As the day turned to evening outside the academy grounds, a few girls were chatting. Are you going to the library today? Of course. There's a test coming up. They even discussed their studies at the dining table. What's your research topic? Another student replied, there are a few things I need to create first. Students were walking back and forth across the courtyard. After classes ended, many went to the library or joined study groups. Chiron, holding his school bag, walked forward. I go to the library every day, and because of that, he had just enough ability to keep up with the other noble students. He looked up at the sky and muttered, the time for sleep is being cut down too. I'm so tired. Thinking for a moment, Chiron shook off the exhaustion, reminding himself that learning magic made him feel lighter because his dream was slowly taking shape. He quickened his pace. I wonder if anyone has come up with a spell that makes people not need sleep? Suddenly, his feet felt like they were floating farther away from the ground. Why is my body getting so light? Chiron was startled when he realized he was flying. What the hell? I'm flying. He glanced behind him and saw someone holding him by the collar. What the heck is going on? Chiron exclaimed, shocked. Someone was carrying him through the air like a hawk carrying its prey. Deep in the forest, there was a thud as Chiron was thrown to the ground. The pain made tears well up in his eyes. Sitting on the ground, Chiron looked up at the person in front of him. His heart raced in panic. Red hair. It was Amy. Amy Karmas. Chiron broke into a cold sweat, thinking to himself, I knew I have to face her someday, but I never expected her to show up like this. Chiron hesitated. Was she really still the same child from last year? Just then, Amy spoke up with that same expression. She said, so, you really do remember who I am? Chiron asked, what? A small flame appeared at the tip of Amy's finger, flaring up violently in front of Chiron. Amy smiled a terrifying smile. Right, I should just sell everything right here, right now. The past seemed like a movie replaying in her mind. Chiron cradled her head, trying to defend herself from the relentless attacks. Someone spoke up, hey, stop. A thug, crouching in front of Chiron, said to Amy, Miss, you're going to kill the kid. Amy thought back to that day. At first, she had planned to take the kid home, with that crying face. She paused, thinking, I wanted to watch a little longer. The brilliant flames were under her control. But now, suddenly, Amy glared, this brat. Chiron straightened up and looked at Amy. That look made her doubt herself. Could he really be the same kid from 5 years ago? Chiron sighed and said, of course I remember. She added, back then, you had those criminals strip me. Amy remembered that moment too. She had laughed, covering her mouth. Well then, why don't we confirm it? Amy interrupted loudly. Chiron, stop. You clearly remember everything. She raised her voice to explain that's not it, right? It's actually a misunderstanding, just your memory, not a huge misunderstanding. See, Chiron wanted to speak, but Amy cut her off. You'll see. Amy blushed, hesitated, and said, I'm not some reckless woman. Chiron couldn't follow her train of thought. Huh? Amy raised her voice. Those thugs were the ones who wanted to strip you, not me. I never ordered that. Then she quickly added, no, wait, I think I heard you say you wanted to see it, or something like that. No, that's not it. Anyway, Amy firmly stated, I wasn't interested in men from the start. Chiron mumbled quietly, no way. You kidnapped me just to say that. Amy froze, and inside she screamed, of course not. But why am I standing here making excuses like this? Chiron suddenly understood something. Was she worried that you would spread rumors about her bad reputation around the school? Things were already awkward enough. This was really a hassle. Chiron stood up. She just needed to apologize. Is that not okay? Amy stepped back. What? Chiron wearily said, I understand that's the memory you want to forget. Anyway, your scores are among the highest in the class and you're quite famous. What happened can't be changed. Chiron continued calmly. So instead of making excuses, wouldn't it be better to just apologize and move on? I think that's the right thing to do. Amy froze for a moment. Apologize. After a brief pause, Amy seemed to snap back to her senses. Her eyes showed panic. This person sure knew how to talk. In front of her, it was like a chessboard and appeared. He was saying all the right things about her to make her look bad, trying to outsmart her and gain an advantage for himself. How dare he try to outwit her? He probably thought she was weak and easy to push around. Amy thought to herself, then opened her mouth. Apologize, listen here, commoner. Amy asked Chiron, when do I get out of apologizing to you? Chiron looked at her, almost in disbelief. What did you just say? Amy stroked her chin thoughtfully. What I mean is, even if I apologize to you, there's no reason to believe that you would just accept my apology and not stab me in the back afterward. There's no trust between us, is there? She nodded. If I just apologize, it would mean admitting that I was wrong in the past. Isn't that just me getting the short end of the stick? Chiron asked her, do you have to get something out of an apology? An apology, the basic act of courtesy towards someone you've hurt, isn't something you do to gain any benefit. Amy's loud laugh interrupted Chiron's words. It seemed like he had no clue how the world worked. She thought to herself, another attack using moral arguments. I get it now. Amy assessed the situation and silently thought, I'll turn this around right here, right now. She continued, if I don't get anything out of it, I have no reason to waste my energy. I can't believe you're bragging about all that just to look good in front of me. Her words left Chiron speechless. It seemed that even when I apologize to you, I still won't be able to stay in the Magic Academy peacefully. Chiron felt Amy was forcing him to open his eyes, thinking, what on earth is that? Looks like the image of the ideal student is just an act. Her true, ugly nature is still there. Amy covered her mouth, letting out a quiet sigh, secretly pleased. I'm almost there. Should I say something else? She asked Chiron, do you know what the scariest thing at the Magic Academy is? Chiron looked at her blankly, not understanding. She spoke in a deep, mysterious tone. That's an upperclassman. Amy's next words felt like a heavy stone on Chiron's shoulders. If an upperclassman took notice of him, not only would every higher year student become his enemy, but so would his classmates. And of course, if anyone found out he was just a commoner, with Amy's sharp eyes, it was very likely he'd be expelled from the academy. Chiron raised his voice and asked, are you worried I'll spread rumors to the point where you'll find a way to get me expelled? She covered her mouth and smiled. Of course not immediately. I just said I'd wait and see how you act. I'll check how well you can keep your mouth shut. Chiron asked, what do you mean by that? She gave an order. From now on, bring me coffee every day. I'll evaluate your trustworthiness through these little tasks. Chiron raised his voice again. Why should I do that? Amy stepped closer to Chiron. I heard you were specially accepted here. For a commoner to get this far, it must have been difficult, right? Wouldn't it be a shame if you got expelled? Chiron agreed, fine, if proving my trustworthiness through these little chores is what it takes, I'll do it. Amy put on her cloak and said, smart choice. Now behave well. After all, your future depends on it. A moment later, her expression darkened and she threatened Chiron. If you dare report this to a teacher, I'll make sure you go down with me. After saying that, she jumped a couple of times, then disappeared like a gust of wind blowing past Chiron. Once Amy was gone, Chiron crouched down to pick up her backpack. Oh, maybe this is better than getting expelled. It looks like her scheming ability is still impressive. Even though it feels unfair to do everything she wants, it's true. Chiron covered his face, thinking that things were already tough right from the start. The next day, everyone was bustling toward the library. Some students at school suddenly got distracted by something, and one of them called to their friend, hey, look. Chiron was walking over, holding a cup of coffee. People around him were surprised and started talking. What? Isn't that the new student? Oh my gosh. Chiron stood in front of everyone and with both hands handed the coffee to Amy, saying, here you go, Senior Amy. Chiron's voice wasn't too loud, but it was clear enough for everyone to hear, and all eyes turned to Amy. The friend standing next to Amy slapped her on the back, covering her mouth, and whispered, no way, Amy, what's going on? Amy brushed her hair back, and her red eyes became visible. She snatched the coffee cup from Chiron's hands. Oh gosh, you're probably going to spill a lot, she said. Then she turned around and walked away. Her friend asked, you're just leaving like that? Amy calmly replied, we need to hurry to class. We don't have time. Chiron's face turned bright red as he stared at Amy's retreating figure. What the heck just happened? The students who had been gathered around began whispering to each other. Oh my God, he just confessed to Amy, but Amy just walked away without saying anything. That's so sad. Shirelle chased after Amy and asked, do you think the new student likes you? Amy shook her head and replied, no, that's not it. I was just giving some advice to the junior. On the outside, she seemed calm, but inside, Amy was bubbling with excitement. She was so happy. Sipping her coffee, she thought, how do you like that? The humiliation I, the great Amy, just gave you. In her mind, a scenario was forming. She thought, with this, he'll be added to the list of juniors who secretly like me. She thought some more, even if Shirone stands in the middle of the school and yells, Amy Karmas is a freak and a bully. People will just shake their heads and feel sorry for him. Oh, he's probably trying to get back at me because I rejected him, she continued thinking. From now on, no matter what he says, no one will believe him. She hummed as she walked along thinking, is there anything sweeter than revenge? Her friend, who had no idea what was going on, remarked, you seem really happy. Amy felt a sense of relief and thought, it's like all my worries from the past 5 years have just melted away. Her thoughts were like a loud drumbeat. This is amazing. Meanwhile, Shirone seemed drained, standing in the middle of the crowd. This is definitely bullying. When did I ever offend her? He thought. Shirone clenched his fists and thought, if I get stuck in negative thoughts, I'll be the only one who loses. No trust, huh? He looked up again, and the emotions in his eyes were different. If I have to do this anyway, then I'll do it perfectly. My experiences and feelings depend on my thoughts. And from that moment on, for the next 10 days, everyone at the academy was buzzing. He's back. He's here again today. Someone shouted, the innocent romantic story at the Magic Academy. 10 days straight, has he confessed his love for 10 days in a row? Cheers and excited chatter filled the air. Amy and Shirelle stood in front of the library, also watching this scene. Amy laughed. Looks like the number of people watching has increased. Behind Chiron, many people were staring at him. Amy grinned. With so many people here, they must all know by now. Should I slowly wrap this up? Suddenly, a friend beside her spoke up and asked, Amy, when are you going to accept Chiron's feelings? The unexpected question left Amy speechless. Huh? What are you saying, Shirelle? Amy asked loudly. Why should I accept him? Did you forget who I am? Shirelle thought for a moment and then said, but there are a lot of rumors going around. Honestly, with other people, you wouldn't even give them a glance. But you always accept coffee from Shirone. Shirelle's words felt like a bolt of lightning to Amy. Everyone was eagerly waiting for the legendary couple of the academy to finally come together. But all that was on her mind were 3 words. Another cup of coffee was placed in front of Amy. Shirone called out, Senior, and with a smile, he said, your coffee. As soon as Shirone spoke, the students below immediately started cheering agree. Shirone looked at Amy with confidence and said casually, this time I didn't spill a single drop of coffee, did I? But inside, he was urging Amy to take it quickly. He needed to hurry to the library. Amy gritted her teeth. Not only were her eyes red, but now her cheeks were also flushed. How did this happen? Are you all messing with me? She asked, her face turning red as she glared at Shirone. Suddenly, she swatted the coffee cup out of Shirone's hand and said, this is so annoying. Shirelle and the other students were stunned. Shirelle gasped and called out, Amy! The coffee spilled onto the ground. Amy said, you think I'll fall for you just because you gave me this? She pointed at him and continued, you're a student who won't even study, but you're always chasing after female students. She turned sharply and added, don't ever give me something like this again. Sir quickly apologized to Shirone, sorry. Hey, Amy. The crowd around them erupted in chatter, rejected. That's so embarrassing. Shirelle asked, what's going on? What will you do if those rumors spread? Amy snapped, who cares? They're probably just people with nothing better to do. She raised her voice, by the time I graduate, it'll all be over. Outside on the stairs, Shirone was bent over, picking up a coffee cup. The gossip kept going. I think she's like an ice princess. That's why she's acting like this. Someone should report her for wasting coffee, one person said. Shirone, poor thing, was still in shock. Really? I don't have to do this anymore. He stood up, holding his bag. A few girls sighed, oh no, he looks so miserable. It's heartbreaking. But in contrast to what everyone else was saying, Shirone's face lit up, I'm free. That night in the library, Amy had her head down, staring at the book in front of her. Damn. She grumbled, then lifted her head, holding her pen just below her nose. I need to stop the freshmen from spreading these rumors, but I'm the one who started them. It'll be fine if I end it before it goes too far. But that's not the most important thing. Amy's eyes were red, her karmas-colored irises reflecting a memory. The surroundings around Amy suddenly changed. It was as if she were sitting in the middle of the academy's courtyard. This was a skill that allowed the user to relive their past experiences. Amy recalled the way Shirone looked when he handed her the coffee. He shyly called out, Senior, here's your coffee. For 10 straight days, every time she met Shirone, she used the karmas lens. Amy had memorized the image of him doing small tasks. She gritted her teeth. He had looked so pleased on the first day, but what Amy saw never changed over the next 9 days. Thinking quietly to herself, his gaze had remained the same, not even a flicker in his pupils. Amy moved closer, focusing on the image in her memory. What did it mean? She asked herself seriously, no matter how much someone might try to hide their feelings, they couldn't truly hide them in their eyes. The autonomic nervous system couldn't be controlled like that, if he could control his gaze. Amy's eyes suddenly brightened. He might be able to control his emotions, just like a robot. She closed her eyes, then snapped the book shut, Reaching her conclusion, he was being extremely honest. Shirelle noticed her movement and quietly asked, "Oh, Amy, are you done?" Amy stood up and started packing her books. "I'm feeling a bit tired today." Shirelle also began to get up. "In that case, you want to go home together?" Amy declined. "No, you don't have to do that. I'm fine. I'll go by myself." Shirelle asked worriedly, "Is it because you feel bad about not accepting Shirone's coffee?" Amy sighed in frustration. "I told you, it's not that." Shirelle reminded her gently, "If you want to talk about something, just let me know, okay?" Amy nodded. "Yeah, thanks." Amy walked out, feeling drained. She muttered to herself, "Oh, I'm so tired. Nothing is going as planned. My mind is all over the place." She pushed open the door. "I need to rest for a while." Suddenly, someone greeted her. "Taking off early today, Amy?" Amy thought, "That's Jake Arias." Jake winked at her. "I thought I'd have to wait for you until midnight." Amy asked him, "Why would you have to wait for me? Are you that bored?" Jake stepped closer and said, "Don't be so harsh. I have heard some rumors. Apparently, there's this guy, a real softie named Chiron, chasing after you." Amy rolled her eyes. "No way. Are you here to make fun of me?" "Oh my God, seriously?" "No, just take this." Jake handed Amy the coffee. "This is top quality coffee from the West. You won't find anything like it on campus. You deserve to be treated like the amazing person you are." Amy looked at him with disdain and asked, "What the hell are you doing?" Jake replied, "As you can see, I'm trying to win your heart." He continued, "Unlike that pathetic guy, I'm going to inherit the title of Minister of Finance for the royal family. I'm much more worthy of you." Amy's disgust was obvious. She coldly responded, "I have no interest in playing any of your disgusting games." Jake froze and repeated, "Disgusting." Amy went on, "And I don't think we're close enough for a relationship like that." She bluntly confronted him, "Do you really think I don't know your group is always trying to bring me down whenever you get the chance?" Jake quickly raised his voice to defend himself. "Wait, I think you're misunderstanding. Isn't what you're saying a little extreme?" He held the steaming coffee cup and stepped closer to Amy. "You're insulting me the same way you're insulting my family. I'll never forgive anyone who touches my family's honor." Jake squinted and smiled. "As a member of the famous Karmas family, you must know that, right?" Amy coolly replied, "Failure." Jake froze. "What?" Amy slapped him hard across the face without a second thought. "Just because you have a bit of fame at school, you think you can act so arrogant, especially with people who don't support your family?" She smiled coldly. "A person who created that ridiculous club and secretly humiliates others, do you even know what honor is?" Jake grinned, showing his teeth in a nasty smile. He rubbed his forehead and cursed at Amy. "Yurkich, looks like you're getting all high and mighty just because you're getting famous now." Jake snapped loudly, his voice dripping with anger. "You think no one can stand up to your Karma's family? Sure, her family might be on top in some fields, but not in terms of power." He kept stepping closer, forcing Amy to back away. "With the power of my family, we could drain your Karma's family's finances." Jake looked down at her from above, raising his voice. "Now, do you get it?" Amy laughed. "Yeah, I get it." She spoke bluntly. "That's right, that look in your eyes is definitely the look of a piece of trash." Amy stared straight at Jake's ugly face and added, "Unlike Shirone, your eyes look like the eyes of a dead fish." Jake couldn't believe what he was hearing. "What? Are you saying I'm not even as good as that pale-faced loser?" Jake nearly lost it. "Yeah, right. I've totally thrown everything out of balance. Before I completely defeat you, I shouldn't be interfering anymore." Jake's next words made Amy furious. "I can say for sure that in just one more day, that guy will never be able to use magic again." Jake continued, "I'll show you just how great I am." But before he could finish, Amy slapped him so hard that it knocked the coffee cup from his hand, spilling it everywhere. She was furious. The cup hit the ground and shattered. "What is this?" Jake gritted his teeth, glaring at Amy. "You arrogant bitch, my patience has limits no matter how beautiful you are." Suddenly, his pupils contracted. Amy had opened her domain. She calmly asked, "What's going on?" Amy's red eyes flickered in the darkness. "What do you plan to do?" "Who?" Jake thought to himself, wondering if she could really use the four forms that quickly. He hesitated before saying, "Are you crazy? Do you realize this goes against the rules of magic here?" Amy laughed loudly, the wind howling down the narrow hallway. She mocked him. "So you're just all looks, huh? At least Chiron doesn't rely on his family background." She continued, "He's someone who takes responsibility for his actions. I bet you won't be able to catch up to him for another 6 months, right?" Jake's veins popped out as he wanted to yell at Amy. That woman was, he thought to himself as she filled the room with a whirlwind of energy. Jake calculated. If he makes any move, will she act? He couldn't go up against the head of this magical academy. But he glanced at Amy, then gripped the handrail beside him, getting ready. A gentleman never seeks revenge immediately. It's best to wait 10 years. Jake ran down the stairs, but don't think this is over. Amy leaned against the wall, murmuring, I haven't been this worked up in ages. She asked herself, why am I doing this? Has he threatened me? Or is it because he knows my secret? Amy remembered what Shirone had said to her in the forest. If doing these little things will earn your trust, I'll do them. Amy turned sharply. She looked at the coffee spill on the floor and muttered, damn it. I guess he won't show up tomorrow. She mumbled again, but thanks to him, my mind's finally clear. A few days later at the academy, Shirelle stood there, eyes filled with tears. The waves Amy had stirred up. A note read, I've captured Chiron. Be at Training Center 14 at 6 p.m. before I castrate him. If you tell any teacher, I'll make you regret it for the rest of your life. Chiron read the contents on the piece of paper and turned to ask Shirelle, who was standing next to him. So, Senior Amy went there to save me, right? At the bottom of the paper, there was a signature from the Dark Mage. These events had turned into a giant, unstoppable wave. The bell rang from the tall tower, signaling the start of class, and students trickled in to prepare for their lessons. Shirone walked and read at the same time. Everyone around him recognized him and whispered quietly, look, that's the guy who was flirting with Senior Amy. It's funny, but isn't he acting a little off? Shirone sighed helplessly. 4 days ago, Amy knocked over my coffee and coldly said no. Inside, Shirone was crying out, how can I even hold my head up after that? He covered his mouth with his book and cleared his throat. In situations like this, a confident smile is all it takes. They wouldn't tease him for long. It seemed like they were starting to doubt him less. Suddenly, something caught Chirone's attention in front of him. Oh, that's Senior Shirelle. Seeing Shirelle standing there alone, Shirone wondered, she's always with Senior Amy. What's going on? Shirone approached and greeted her. Senior. As soon as he spoke, Shirelle suddenly screamed. He couldn't help but scream in response. Shirelle lunged forward and grabbed Shirone by the collar. Why are you here? Where's Amy? Shirone, shaken from the sudden movement, asked, why are you asking me this out of nowhere? Shirelle shoved a piece of paper into Shirone's face and said, look at this. You should be dealing with something right now. Shirone stared at the paper and asked, what? The paper read, Shirone is in my hands. If you want to save her, come to Training Hall 14 before 6 p.m. If you report this to a teacher, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. Sign, Break Magician. Shirone stared at the paper, bewildered, and asked, am I being kidnapped? She turned to Shirelle and asked, who is this person? That's the Dark Magician. 30 minutes earlier, Amy and Shirelle were walking through the school grounds when someone blocked their path and greeted them. Senior, how are you? Shirelle grimaced. It's him again. Amy said, didn't I tell you to get lost? Why are you still talking to me? The blonde guy grinned. You should tone down the attitude. You look better. He waved the paper in his hand. The boss wants to see you. Shirelle pulled Amy away. Ignore him. Amy replied, that's why he'll forever be stuck in the 5th grade. The blonde guy added, the boss said if I give you this, you'll listen. He said, if you don't want anything to happen to your boyfriend, you should accept it. Shirelle frowned as if she was looking at a madman. What did you just say? That's disgusting. You're disgusting. Then she turned to Amy and said, let's head to the library right now. However, Amy suddenly turned back and snatched the paper from the person's hand. Hey, Shirelle called out in confusion. Amy. Amy stared at the paper in her hand. Shirone's been kidnapped. She thought of Jake. Was it him? At that moment, Jake had said, I'll make sure he can never use magic again. Amy cursed under her breath. Jake, you bastard. Amy clenched the paper tightly in her hand and shouted, so what? What does it matter, Amy? She threw the paper forcefully to the ground. What's his problem with me? Shirelle asked, what's going on? The blonde guy waved his hand. He said, whatever. I'm just delivering the letter. Shirelle opened the paper and read it aloud. Dark Mage? Is that the group of evil people who bully the top students? She muttered. Why did they kidnap Shirone? What does that have to do with you? Amy looked worried. That day I really couldn't hold back, so I got back at him, she said. Shirelle replied, you should tell the professor. She added, it's not just Shirone. You're in danger too. Amy muttered, Professor, yeah, that's the right thing to do, but it's not going to be easy. Amy imagined the scene of being taken to the meeting room. If the board of professors got involved in the investigation, she would have to reveal her relationship with Shirone. Her past would be exposed. Amy thought about Shirone's face. If that happened, they would find out. The image of Shirone's pitiful expression flashed through her mind. She remembered what she had once said. For someone like you, a commoner, getting this far must have been tough, right? It'd be such a shame if you had to quit now. And Shirone's words, if it makes you trust me, I'm willing to do it. Amy's thoughts drifted back to last year. The person on the ground said, it's not me. She froze, seeing Shirone lying on the ground, pleading desperately, please. Amy clenched her fists. She called Shirelle. Amy handed her bag to Shirelle and said, I'm going. If you don't see me come back, tell the professor. Shirelle looked shocked. What? Why would you? She watched Amy walk away, shouting, What can you do by yourself? Do you know how many people they have? Amy turned around and said, Sorry, but I have my reasons. Don't worry about me. She said with confidence, even if there are 10 assholes like Jake, they won't be able to do anything to me. Back in reality, Shirone looked at the paper in his hand and said, So, he couldn't believe it and asked Shirelle, Did Senior Amy come to rescue me? In his mind, Shirone thought, No way, someone as sly as her. Shirone quickly asked, Did she go alone? What should we do? Shirelle replied, Amy said she had her own reasons. It's the first time she's asked me for help, and look what happened. She continued, She told me to wait until 7. Shirone stroked his chin. Seems like we have no other choice. He thought about why she didn't want to tell the professor. Shirone pulled out his pocket watch and checked the time. He figured she probably wanted to keep the secret between just the two of them. He and she were in this together. After a moment, Shirone realized that she had no choice but to go alone to protect her secret. Then he told Shirelle, I have to go too. Shirone tossed his bag onto the table with a thud. Senior, just wait until then, okay? Shirelle called out, Wait a second. She called, but Shirone had already turned and ran off. As he ran, he thought, Hall 14 in the mountain direction. I wonder if I'll make it in time. Suddenly, Shirone's feet lifted off the ground. Shirelle was holding him and flying. She said, How long would it take if you ran? It's better if I go with you. She spoke loudly to Shirone. I'm about to teleport. Hold on tight. Shirone, confused, asked, What do you mean? A flash of yellow light appeared beside Shirone. He saw that his hands were surrounded by a faint golden glow. In the blink of an eye, they instantly disappeared from the sky. Shirone panicked and screamed. A few students walking inside the building saw something flash in the sky and asked, What was that? Who just used magic? Shirone's eyes widened in shock. Their destination was the forest. Shirelle quickly hugged Shirone and stopped. It's dangerous to crash into a tree when teleporting, so from here we should fly instead. As soon as she finished speaking, she immediately grabbed Shirone and took off into the air. Moments later, Shirelle landed on the ground. Shirone, shaking, grabbed onto a tree to steady himself. He wasn't prepared for this at all. Don't hold onto the tree, you'll throw up, she warned. As for Shirelle, she had just landed on Hall 14 and quickly ran off, calling out, Where are you, Amy? Shirelle was worried. There's no one here. This is strange, we're 10 minutes earlier than our meeting time. Shirone wiped his mouth and said, Maybe they changed the location. The address in the letter was leaked, so they probably tried to avoid the teacher's watch. Shirelle shouted, What about Amy? Shirone paused to think, then replied, This is a really complicated plan. Secrets, the past tangled up with the present. Now's not the time to worry about my own secrets, whether it's for the people or whatever. She and I could both get suspended. We're in a situation way worse than I thought. Shirone said, Senior, you should head back and report this to the professor. He looked ahead and added, It'd be much faster if you go back alone. Shirelle replied, But Amy told me to wait until 7. Shirone shook his head. It's fine. This is because of me, after all. He looked at Shirelle and said, I'll help her, so don't worry. Senior, go quickly. Shirelle, confused, asked, What? After hearing him, she suddenly screamed, clutching her head, The real reason is you. What's your relationship with her? Are you two secretly dating? Is there something I don't know? Shirone urgently shouted, We don't have time. The longer we wait, the more dangerous it gets. Shirelle snapped out of it and said, All right, you stay here and wait. After watching Shirelle run off, Shirone let out a relieved sigh. The mountains were familiar territory for him. Standing there among the trees, he activated his domain. He closed his eyes and focused, confident that he would find a clue. The magic field kept expanding across the forest. Shirone seemed to catch something. Here it is, a footprint. He followed the trail. The footprints were from 2 people and were still fairly fresh, but they stopped halfway. Did they fly? Suddenly, a sound echoed through the forest, startling Shirone. I heard something. He stood up and looked toward the column of smoke rising deep in the forest. Don't tell me something's happened. Deep in the forest, the person who had just cast a spell on their voice slipped up. The blonde man, handing a letter to Amy, smirked. Oh, I almost hit you. That was supposed to be a firework to welcome you, Amy. Amy glanced at the bright fire nearby. A few more people had shown up above her. They landed on the ground surrounding Amy. Wow, Amy's here. She caught a big one like this. Our boss did something else, one of the newcomers said. Cut it out, another one replied. Jake, leading the group, said, Miss Amy here is our honored guest, so show some respect. Amy stood in the middle of the circle, arms crossed, looking at them. Is that so? I thought you'd be something impressive. Turns out you're just a bunch of trash with nothing better to do. Jake asked, Did you really come alone? Is that kid so important to you that you risked everything to come here? Amy coldly said, "It's just catching a mouse. No need to burn down the whole house." Jake gritted his teeth, so angry he almost laughed. "Still acting tough, huh? With all these people around, I don't think you'll get what you want." He shot Amy a sly look. "This time, I've thought everything through." Amy didn't even glance his way. She replied, "What you've planned is your business, not mine. Where's Shirone?" The people around Jake burst out laughing at Amy's question. Where else would he be? He's probably still licking books somewhere in the library. He doesn't even know what's about to happen to his girlfriend. The big blonde guy mocked loudly. "Books. Oh, how I love you." Whatever happened to him was irrelevant. They all stared at Amy now, focused only on her. These guys were bent on revenge and had lost their minds over it. Jake looked at Amy furious. "What happened last night still has me pissed. I always get even, so watch yourself." Amy exhaled slowly. If Chiron's not here, it's easy enough. She smiled. Like they say, when people are always watching you, it's really a hassle. Amy's body was immediately surrounded by a blue light. She spoke. "It's a bit of a hassle to clean up all this mess." Jake and the others froze, confused. "What?" He nervously wiped the sweat off his forehead. "No, it can't be." Before they could process what was happening, Amy struck the blonde guy behind her. His arm was set on fire. The blonde guy screamed, "It's too hot." The others immediately panicked. "That girl, she's really shooting fire." Jake shouted as he ran, "Stay calm and get out of the way." He yelled louder. Targeting methods ineffective with this many targets. Quickly, Jake and a few others flew up into the air trying to dodge and return to their original positions. But Amy's spiritual field reached them. Jake froze in place and boom, a blast went off right where he had been. Amy remained calm, standing below. She swung her hand again and her eyes glowed a sharp red. "Come play with me." Amy's spiritual field split into multiple beams, sweeping over them all. She focused her power and flames roared. With a boom, she unleashed countless fireballs in every direction. The fireballs shot out wildly. The others ducked and covered their heads to avoid them. Hey, didn't you say she was just practicing the target form? How is her switching speed so fast?" One guy who was hit was thrown back. Jake cursed under his breath. "Dan, what the hell is going on? Her skill level is completely different from what we saw in training. Could she have actual combat experience? It's so hot." Jake flew straight up into the air. However, no matter how strong his skills were, there were always weaknesses. Hovering in midair, he looked down, preparing to block an attack aimed horizontally. The wind gathered into a vortex in his palm, so I knew I had to attack vertically. Jake mustered all his strength and launched an attack at Amy. Windblade. His windblade descended from above, getting closer and closer to Amy. Seeing that Amy couldn't avoid it anymore, Jake grinned, showing his teeth. "Gotcha." But suddenly, just as the windblade was about to hit, Amy swiftly dodged by falling to the side. Jake shouted, "What? How is that possible?" Amy looked at him with a mocking smile. "This is called force map, darling." She raised her hand. Fireball. Her spirit energy targeted Jake directly. He yelled, "Damn it." Amy's fireball hit Jake squarely, sending him flying several meters away. Jake nearly lost it. "You damn witch." Amy moved forward, smiling gently. "Maybe if you didn't waste so much time on pointless things, your results wouldn't be such garbage." Jake gritted his teeth in anger, reaching out to counterattack. "Don't you dare underestimate me." Amy laughed and said, "Don't resist, it's useless. This time, I won't let you off easily." Suddenly, something struck her eyes. A wave of purple energy rushed at her, and Amy's body seemed frozen in place. She panicked, not understanding what was happening. "What is this?" she shouted in pain, clutching her face. Jake and his group appeared around her, attacking together, pushing harder. It took a while, but they finally caught her. Jake grinned, showing his teeth. "Surprised? That lioness is done for." Amy's power field is falling apart. Jake continued, "If you don't break this energy field, you might go crazy. This trap is basically a counterspell." Amy cursed, "You bastard." Her eyes glowed a bright red. "You dare use forbidden magic?" She muttered to herself, "Damn it, even the red eyes can't heal me." A gust of wind suddenly blew, grabbing Amy's hands. Her arms and legs were instantly bound. Jake laughed loudly. "Finally, I got you, bitch." He ran his fingers through his hair, walking closer to Amy. "So, what do you say? Have you reconsidered my offer from yesterday?" Out of nowhere, Jake pulled out a dagger and threatened her. "You better think carefully. You see, I'm not afraid of committing a crime." Amy gritted her teeth. "I warned you. If you mess with me, I'll take your life." She thought to herself, "I can't get it off. I can't even handle the damn comb. After I turned 12, I couldn't train anymore. Damn it." Amy hovered in the air. "I need to figure something out." Jake laughed loudly. "Looks like you realize just how bad your situation is, huh?" He ran his fingers along the dagger in his hand and continued. I heard you've had enough of those guys, huh? Let me help you out. Jake gave a shameless grin. All I have to do is make a quick swipe, and he'll stay away from you. The red gleam of the dagger was dangerously close to Amy's face, and he seemed to take great pleasure in it. I've wanted to do this from the start. You should have been in this kind of trouble right from the beginning. The tip of the dagger hung in front of Amy's face, and she could hear Jake's arrogant voice. You should have been in this kind of trouble right from the start. He ordered, Speak. Amy squeezed her eyes shut. Damn it, I don't have any strength left. Suddenly, she remembered something from 5 years ago in a narrow alley. The image of Shirone lying on the ground. So this is how he felt. In a tense moment, someone shouted, Stop! Amy opened her eyes and looked toward the source of the voice. It was Chiron, appearing with a wooden stick in his hand. He yelled, You bunch of useless sons-in-law. The group led by Jake froze in surprise. He was taken aback. You are? Amy was even more surprised than Jake. Senior. Chiron was breathing heavily, gripping his stick tightly as he glared at them. Jake sneered, What's wrong? You came alone? He waved the knife in his hand. The prince is here. His gang immediately joined in, mocking the prince, even if you do something. Amy yelled angrily, You idiot. Why did you come alone? Chiron stood silently, calculating. Even though they had the advantage in numbers, did they really think they could overpower the leader of the intermediate students? After all, Senior Serial must have already called for the teachers. He just needed to buy a little more time. Chiron's aura flared. He reminded himself that he had once defeated Ryan with his swordsmanship, and he could do it again. He ordered firmly, Let Senior Amy go now. Seeing Chiron running toward him, Jake mocked, Are you crazy? Let her go so you two can attack us together. Chiron continued running with his stick. The blonde guy asked Jake, Is that idiot just running straight at us? Jake smirked, You guys, get ready. They stood still, staring at Chiron. At that moment, Chiron also realized something was wrong. His domain suddenly shattered, just like Amy's earlier. His eyes went wide, and the staff in his hand dropped. Chiron clutched his head in pain and screamed. He collapsed to the ground as Jake and his group laughed at him. They laughed loudly, just as expected from a prince. They were not disappointed in him at all. What do you think you're going to do with a mage in that? Amy shouted at Chiron, Get rid of your domain now. That's anti-magic. Chiron knelt on the ground, clutching his head. Anti-magic? This. Amy kept shouting, You might not be able to use magic for the rest of your life. Get rid of your domain now, or you'll go crazy. Are you even listening to me? Chiron's mind was hazy. His senses seemed to be slipping away, and his consciousness felt like it was breaking apart. He remembered what Professor Athela had once said, A mage must maintain focus to survive in a chaotic battlefield. Chiron held his head, thinking about the kind of defense that could prevent the domain from collapsing due to most disruptive forces. A defense that can withstand physical shocks and won't collapse under them. It'll also protect against mental attack spells. Athela's voice echoed in Chiron's mind. After all, anti-magic and magical energy were just ripples on the surface. He was still in pain, clutching his head as he endured the mental torture when his energy field was under attack. Chiron thought, If I increase the density of my field to the point where it can't be pierced through. Chiron looked at his hand, focusing his mind, and began to reconstruct his energy field. The blonde guy was surprised. What? He's trying to withstand it? Jake sneered and said, Is he trying to show off like he's a top-tier student? He's just a rookie. Chiron shouted, Increase the output. Amy panicked. Don't do that, you idiot. There are too many of them. There's a limit to how much you can take. But Jake and the others were stunned. What? They watched as Chiron's energy field was being rebuilt again. What the hell is that? The planes of the field grew more solid. Chiron slowly stood up, trying to focus. I need more shards. Jake and his group were struck by the magic and screamed, What's he doing? They were reflecting it back at him. Jake said, Still attacking. Don't be afraid, your emotions are disrupting the waves. Jake yelled, You want to get hit by anti-magic, huh? Meanwhile, Chiron had fully straightened up, stepping forward one step at a time. With each step, the barrier grew stronger. Chiron's magic barrier became larger and harder. Jake spoke up. Don't come any closer. The magic resistance is pushing them back. No, their allies are all being attacked by the magic resistance. They're in pain, holding their heads and screaming, Help me. Amy stood frozen, not understanding what was happening. Suddenly, the magic that was binding her loosened. She had been so focused on figuring out why she couldn't use her own barrier that she didn't realize what was going on. Her hands were free. She could use her magic now. The magic resistance had disappeared. Amy landed on the ground, staring blankly at Chiron's barrier in front of her. It's impossible. Could such a cold, unyielding barrier really exist? Chiron was even bleeding from his nose. He looked down at the ground, feeling something moving beneath his feet. Chiron's barrier was pressing against the magic resistance. He stood still, sensing it, almost as if he were standing on a tiny worm. Jake, battered by his own forbidden magic, growled, "This doesn't make any sense. Are you messing with me?" He looked at his fallen comrades who were sprawled on the ground and shouted, "There are 6 of us. How could we possibly lose to a kid like him?" Jake, going mad from defeat, began to lash out at Shirone. "That's right, that damn brat. He must be a student who specializes in magic resistance. That's probably why he was allowed into the academy with special recommendations." Jake stood up and opened his aura. "You think you can beat me with battle magic," he said. Shirone froze. This was a big problem. Jake on the other side was preparing to launch 2 wind blades. Shirone was confused, not knowing which magic to use. Jake laughed loudly. "I should cut you down." Before he could finish his sentence, he was hit by a blast from Amy and fell to the ground, even rolling several meters away. Jake barely had a chance to recover before he was hit again, this time square in the face. Amy cursed him out. "That's it, you bastard." Shirone quickly stepped in to stop Amy, who was on the verge of losing control and beating Jake to a pulp. "Senior, calm down," Shirone said. As Amy continued to punch Jake, she asked, "What are you going to do to me?" "Say that again." She hit him like she'd never been able to before, repeatedly asking, "Say something again, I dare you. You damn bastard." Shirone couldn't help but feel helpless. If she kept going like this, he would really die. Using all his strength, he pulled her back. "Please stop." After a brief struggle, the forest fell silent. Shirone turned to Amy and asked softly, "Are you okay?" But Amy didn't respond. She lay motionless on him. Shirone called out again, "Senior." Finally, Shirone realized that Amy had passed out. He shouted in panic, "Wake up, Senior, Senior." Inside the forest, both Shirone and Jake's group were lying scattered on the ground. Shirone looked down at Amy, who had fainted and was lying unconscious on top of him. "I didn't think she'd pass out like this. Did she collapse from exhaustion?" He paused for a moment before speaking again. "Thanks, Senior." Shirone whispered softly, "I heard you came here to save me." At that moment, Amy suddenly jolted awake as if springing to life. She sat up quickly. "Now I feel much better." Amy turned to Shirone and said, "By the way, how did you manage to gather the courage to come here and fight them when you're so weak yourself?" Chiron winced as Amy accidentally bumped into him, clutching his stomach and kneeling on the ground. As expected, there was nothing about her to praise. Amy cleared her throat. "All right, let's get out of here. If any of the teachers catch us, we'll be in big trouble." Chiron grabbed Amy's hand and stood up. "Senior Shirelle must have already reported this to the teachers. I asked her to do that." Amy froze. "What?" "I told Shirelle not to do that. Why would she?" Chiron raised his voice slightly. "What else could we have done? It was an emergency." Amy held her head in frustration. "That's because you don't understand how things work around here. Everything is going to get a lot more complicated if the school gets involved in something like this. The mages only let things slide after they've fully investigated and understood what's going on. In other words, they won't just ignore this." Amy shouted, "Do you want our secret to be exposed too?" Chiron responded, "You think that's the issue right now? We just barely escaped with our lives. Jake's lying over there listening to you two argue. A secret?" Amy snapped, "Dan, we can worry about the consequences later. Let's just run for now." Chiron, confused, asked, "We are running already. What more do you want?" At that moment, a bright pink light shone down from above, freezing both of them in place. Amy gritted her teeth. "Please, let it be an older teacher. An easygoing older teacher would just overlook this. Someone like that might say, yeah, something like this was bound to happen." But instead, 2 terrifying figures appeared. One was Thad, the fire mage, a level 6 certifier. The other was Saina, the ice mage, also a level 6 certifier. The moment Amy saw them, she immediately cradled her head and muttered to herself, "I'm done for. Not these 2 again, the 2 hottest-headed advisors in the whole school. I'm definitely dead." Shirelle rushed over, asking, "Amy, are you okay?" She grabbed Amy's face, shaking her gently. "Are you hurt anywhere? What happened to your head?" Amy, dazed, replied, "I'm fine. How did you get here so quickly?" Thad over here is about to cast a spell. A sphere shot straight up into the sky. Chiron watched in awe. "That's the Blaze Sun spell," she said. "I heard it's a very difficult one to master." Thanks to the light from the spell, Thad saw 6 of the attackers lying unconscious on the ground. What the heck happened here? Thad grimaced and turned to Amy and Chiron. Both of them jumped in surprise. Thad approached, shook Amy, and asked, "Amy, how did someone as skilled as you end up in a situation like this?" He continued, "Are you hurt anywhere?" Saina heard this and frowned. She turned to Chiron. "Chiron, I heard you 2 were in danger. Can you explain what's going on here?" Chiron nodded. "It's because," but before she could finish, someone else interrupted. Jake spoke up. I believe I can explain everything to the teachers. With his bruised face, he went on, to be honest, I had a personal grudge, so I challenged Amy to a one-on-one duel. It's something that happens pretty often at our age. Saina's gaze turned icy. A duel, huh? She asked. I heard she received a threatening letter, and she glanced at Jake's teammates lying on the ground. I saw you using anti-magic. You're not going to claim you don't know the Academy's rules, are you? Jake was taken aback and quickly tried to explain himself. It's just, Amy is too strong, and I only used it as a way to defend myself. Jake confidently said, but look, we're the ones facing the toughest consequences. He pounded his chest and continued, not to mention it was Amy who broke the rules first when she attacked me in the library. That's why I suggested a one-on-one duel. Don't you find it strange that Amy didn't report it to the teacher right away? Amy, hearing him confidently twist the facts, shouted, "What nonsense are you talking about? You're the one who threatened me first in the library, and now you're writing that you kidnapped Shirone." Jake cut her off. But did we really kidnap him? In fact, you attacked us first even today. Jake pointed at Shirone, and it's clear that Shirone didn't report it to the teacher. He ran straight here. That means you two are hiding something. He raised his voice. Do you the teachers understand now? Jake firmly pushed the blame onto the two of them. The guilty ones are them. Thad turned to look at Shirone, while Amy gritted her teeth, muttering, "You piece of trash." Jake grinned. So why don't you two reveal those secrets right here, right now? What do you say? He quietly sneered, "Do you understand now the terror of a dark mage?" He quietly calculated his next move. He had a plan to blow things out of proportion. He didn't care how much money it would cost. Once he uncovered that valuable secret of theirs, the local authorities, the national agencies, and even the media would all know about it. He would spread the news everywhere. But Professor Saina interrupted his madness. The air around them grew colder in an instant. She said, "You can stop talking nonsense now, Jake." The cold wind howled fiercely. Saina continued, "You and your friends use counter magic. You've even gone beyond the limits of what counter magic should be used for. You use it to attack others." She glanced at Shirone and added, "You know that Shirone's or Amy's minds couldn't have been destroyed. They could have even lost their sanity." Shirone gritted his teeth. "My life." Professor Saina's gaze turned an icy blue. "I think what you've done is more than enough to expel you from this academy." Jake slapped his chest and laughed loudly. "A little advisor like you really thinks you can expel me?" Thad stepped forward and whispered to Saina, "Hey, the Arias family is basically the lifeline of this whole academy. Without their funding, we'd even lose our salaries." Saina responded calmly, "Isn't it our role as advisors to guide students and steer them down the right path?" She coldly said, "If you can't even do that, then you'd better pack your bags and leave this academy right now." Jake laughed out loud. "All right, let's see if I get expelled or if you get fired first." He tried to open his swollen, puffy eyes to look at Saina and said, "This world runs on money. Money. In front of money, everyone will be forced to bow down." Saina's face grew darker by the second. Jake kept talking nonstop. "You should take this chance to learn a little more about how this world really works." Saina calmly raised her hand. "Looks like I still need to teach you a lesson." A pillar of ice seemed to rise up, and the wind was blowing so hard it was almost impossible to open your eyes. Shirone gasped, "So cool." Amy squinted. "How did things get this far?" Thad called out, "Teacher." Mr. Thad stopped him. "You can't just deal with a student like that." In the next moment, Jake was surrounded by a mountain of ice, like a giant ice tree, with countless sharp icicles pointed straight at his face. Shirone stared in awe. Impressive. She didn't even touch a thread of his clothes. That means she has perfect control over her magic, down to the smallest detail. Shirone was still stunned, so that's why she's called the Genius Ice Mage. Saina said, "Jake, do you really think everything can be solved with money?" He still didn't get it and yelled, "Stop talking nonsense and undo this ice magic for me." Saina snapped her fingers and the iceberg immediately shattered. She calmly said, "We know you've hurt many other students, but the Academy has hesitated to punish your improper actions." Jake knelt on the ground. "That's because of my family's donations, right?" Saina shouted, "Don't make that mistake." She continued, "The school isn't a place where teachers teach you for money. More than that, we teach you lessons that even money can't buy." Jake hesitated. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" Saina responded, "It's about what you dream of becoming." She asked seriously, "Don't you want to become a mage?" Her words awakened Jake. He remembered who he used to be. "Miss Saina, if you move me up to grade 5, I'll become a great mage and repay you." Saina continued, "That's the dream you shared with your friends. You all studied together to become mages. Isn't that why you decided to go this far?" Jake was stunned. He recalled the memories with his friends from childhood to growing up together. Saina asked, "Do you really want to destroy everything you've built so far with your own hands?" She gazed at him softly. He stayed silent for a moment before speaking, "Ms. and then his face dropped to the ground. A long time later, he said, "I'm sorry." Shirone looked up at the sky, thinking about what mattered most to him. Inside the punishment room, there was a scream. "It hurts so much. Please go easy on me. Don't make such a fuss. It's just a scratch. In the end, whatever's going to happen will happen." Shirone and Amy were sitting in the meeting room. Thad asked Shirone, "Why didn't you report it to the teacher right away? When something like that happens, the first thing you should do is tell the teacher." His voice was flat, but instead, you went to help an upperclassman, someone much higher in rank than you. That's not something we can consider an acceptable excuse. Amy and Shirone exchanged a glance and fell silent. After a while, Amy spoke up. "I understand now. I'll answer honestly." Shirone looked at her and said, "Right, as if we could keep this a secret forever," even though he didn't know who had told the principal about this. Amy was quiet for a moment, then said, "Actually, Chiron is." Chiron thought about his own identity, and Amy winked. "My boyfriend." As soon as Amy finished speaking, Thad, Sena, and Sherelle all stared in shock. The loud scream echoed throughout the academy. "What?" Another shout rang out, "Help! Is anyone there?" In her imagination, Amy felt like a princess trapped by a thorny rose branch calling for help. "Please save me." Jake and his friends seemed like cruel villains. "Who would come all the way to this lonely mountain to save you? You should have accepted our feelings. None of this would have happened." Suddenly, the sound of a horse's whinny startled them. When they turned around, they saw a shining white steed. Someone asked, "Who else is here?" Chiron appeared like a prince, kicking the bad guys aside. They screamed, "Behind you." Amy, hanging from a tree, asked, "Are you Chiron, the one who cut through the thorny branch that was trapping me?" Chiron looked at her with deep affection and replied, "I'm here now." Chiron lifted Amy like a princess. "Amy," he called. She looked at him sweetly and said, "Chiron." They called each other's names, lost in the moment. Chiron, Amy. The students around them screamed with excitement. "No way. Is this for real?" A few girls stared at Sherelle, who stood in front of them, and said, "How romantic." Sherelle nodded. "Of course, it's all real." She confidently added, "I saw it with my own eyes." Suddenly, Amy appeared dark and gloomy behind her and called Sherelle. Amy's voice echoed throughout the academy. "What kind of rumors are you spreading? I know you've been into those cheesy romance novels lately, but this is just too much to accept." On the Academy's notice board, an official announcement was posted, detailing the punishments related to the wrongdoings of the school's research club. Specifically, it addressed the club's violent behavior, along with countless other images. Amy Karmis, the goddess of Alfias, admits to dating the new student Shirone Arian. Senior Amy says she's dating the new student to save the person she loves from a web of injustice and violence. A young love blossomed the moment they connected. Dark magic was defeated far too easily. But who exactly is this new student? Amy? Shirone. A passionate kiss under the moonlight in a remote forest. On campus, a group of girls couldn't stop sighing, "Oh my gosh, I'm so jealous." Amy's voice rang out, "Sherelle, are you trying to get yourself killed?" She sighed, "You've never actually seen it for yourself." Sherelle excitedly laughed. "Why don't I need to see it to know what happened? You said you two were dating, right? So it's only a matter of time before you get engaged, isn't it?" She laughed and said, "I've thought this through. With this, no guy will dare to come near you anymore." Amy clicked her tongue. "That's true. That part makes sense." A few days ago, when the incident happened, Thad slammed his hand on the table and asked Amy, "Are you lying to me?" Thad shouted, "The Amy I know doesn't care about dating anyone. This is ridiculous. Plus, Shirone is the new transfer student." Amy calmly made up a story. "Actually, I met Shirone when we were kids, but meeting again here at the Magic Academy, it must be fate." She turned, tucked her hair behind her ear, and smiled at Shirone. "Right, Shirone?" Shirone quietly asked, "So how do you plan to handle?" But before he could finish, Amy kicked him sharply in the shin. Shirone quickly nodded. "Yes, that's right." Thad and Sena were speechless. So that's the reason. No wonder he's been acting all panicked, following Amy around like that. Amy thought, well, pretending to be lovers is better than letting our past come to light. Sherelle was still excited. "I knew it. I had a feeling from the start. What's this all about?" "Amy, you're such an idiot." Amy quietly drank her water. Sherelle asked, "There's a combined class today, right? You'll get to see Chiron then." Forgotten her lunch, Sherelle leaned in, eager to know. "Do you have plans to meet up with him after class? Maybe have dinner together? You two love your secret gates in the library." Amy replied calmly, "We're just focused on studying, like usual." Sherelle rested her chin on her hand. How boring. Amy smiled weakly, thinking to herself, "I have a ton of work to do. I don't have time to waste on fake love stories." She clenched her fists, thinking about Chiron too. That useless guy was just enjoying his normal school life, carefree as always. Then Amy realized something was off. Wait a second. Why does this make me feel uneasy? At the combined class training area at the middle school, someone called out to Shirone. Shirelle cheerfully shouted, "Hey, over here." Shirone waved. "Hello, senior." Shirelle excitedly ran over. "Hey, how's it going today? Do you miss Amy?" Shirone scratched his head and laughed. "Senior, you're so funny." Amy sneered, "So that's it, huh? It's really him. He should be grateful for even pretending to be my boyfriend, but just look at him." Amy was annoyed and thought, he should be feeling some pressure just standing next to me. How dare he treat me like that? Suddenly, she cleared her throat to grab Shirone's attention. Amy patted her chest and said, "When it's just us, feel free to talk to me like we're equals. No need to be formal about senior-junior stuff. We've known each other too well for that." Shirelle, standing next to her, was surprised. "Oh my God, I've never heard Amy say anything like that. Is this the power of love?" Amy replied, "Well, considering our relationship." Shirone quickly smiled awkwardly and said, "Oh no, it's fine. You're still a senior after all." He added, "Class is starting, so I'll head in first." With that, Shirone walked away, leaving Amy standing there. Shirelle, still a bit confused, said, "Okay, bye then." Amy turned to walk away too. Shirelle quickly called out, "Amy." She looked back at Shirone. "What's going on?" Shirone sat down on a chair, silently listening to the nasty remarks being aimed at him. Congrats. You must be so proud of yourself, huh? You just came to class to play the love game, right? You don't even have any skills. Did you get into the academy just because of your looks?" Countless disapproving glances were directed at Shirone because he was always out on dates instead of focusing on his studies. Shirone silently listened to their conversations, knowing absolutely nothing about magic spells. His hand, resting on his thigh, clenched tightly until it shook. It all started 2 days ago, when the rumors began spreading faster. 2 days ago, on the 7th grade class bulletin board, someone ran in and announced, "Hey, did you guys hear the news?" They all started talking loudly. Senior Amy and the new student are dating. Of course, I heard they even admitted it in front of the teachers. A boy started crying and comforting his friends. "This can't be true. Senior Amy should be with me. Someone like you doesn't stand a chance. Come on, cry at my shoulder." Then a girl added, "This is so annoying. I keep thinking about those two being the center of attention now as a couple. I was planning on making the new guy mine." Maria sat and listened to everyone laughing and gossiping. Well, it makes sense. Like attracts like, right? How could it be any other way? We should be congratulating him. Suddenly, someone appeared beside Maria, causing her to jump in surprise, but wasn't it a little strange? Everyone in the class turned to look at the person who had spoken. A short-haired girl asked, "What do you mean?" He replied, "I'm talking about the new student. Look at this." A newcomer slammed a piece of paper onto the desk. "What's this? Midterm scores?" Everyone gathered around to look at the paper. "What's going on? What's this? What is this?" The paper showed everyone's scores. Chiron was at the bottom of the class with a 30 in every subject. Wasn't he supposed to be at the top? People started to look at Chiron differently. "See, looks like he doesn't know anything about magic." One student, not believing it, asked, "How is that even possible?" The big guy spoke up, "And yet he still got special treatment to attend. Something fishy's going on here." He couldn't stop bad-mouthing Chiron. He's just using his family to back him up, spreading rumors that he's a genius, and then he charms some noble girl. He sighed. The world really isn't fair. A spoiled rich kid who only knows how to party and is here just to find a girlfriend. His words successfully sparked frustration among the others. "So you're saying he only got in because of connections? Now that I think about it, doesn't it seem suspicious?" People started pretending to stand up for what's right, wanting to push Shirone out. "For the future of all of us, we need to kick this filth out of our school. We will never forgive him." Maria sat quietly, listening to everything. The door to the classroom opened, and someone inside was still angrily shouting, "How could the academy do something so unfair?" Shirone silently looked inside. It was strange. Clearly, the atmosphere in the classroom was unusually quiet, which made Shirone feel confused. Just a moment ago, the classroom had been noisy and lively. He walked into the room, and Shirone asked his desk partner, "What's the next class?" However, his partner just walked away without answering. Shirone stayed silent. You probably didn't need to ask why people were acting like this. The students whispered among themselves, but they made sure he could hear them. They were blaming him, and even Amy was being affected because of him. Right now, in the practice room, it was time for field practice by class. Shirone stood alone. He tried to focus on his field, but he could still hear people mocking him. Why is he practicing here too? Shirone quietly listened to what they said. His field had touched theirs, and it made them disgusted. They kept showing their excessive hostility towards Shirone. His field was too big, too overwhelming. At that moment, Othello walked over and called out to Shirone. "Shirone, how's everything going?" Shirone quickly greeted her, Professor Athela. He asked her, the redirecting form is quite difficult. When I try to move my field out of my body, it feels like my consciousness is going along with it. Athela smiled and said, that feeling is normal, Shirone. Your field's convergence is natural, so it will pull your consciousness with it. She continued, the redirecting form is artificial, so having your field leave your body doesn't really suit you. Chiron nodded, I thought so too. Athela asked, what about the other 4 forms you can create? Chiron thought for a moment, those other forms you mean? Chiron replied, it's not a problem. I guess so. Athela smiled and asked, great. Would you like to try practicing in the image sphere? Chiron was surprised. Huh? Chiron was confused. You mean right now? Athela said, if you don't feel comfortable, we can leave it for later. Chiron remained silent and didn't answer. She continued, Chiron is the only student in class 7 who can switch between all 4 forms, so I just wanted to see it once. Athela looked at Chiron with concern. This child wanted to use the image sphere from the very first day. No, is she worried about how the other students will look at her? Chiron thought, now isn't the time to be emotionally sensitive, but someone who believes in their own worth won't be easily shaken by that. After a moment, she looked up and said, I'll try. Please give me your feedback, teacher. The other 7th grade students immediately shot hostile looks at Chiron. She's really going to do it. One of them whispered. Another student responded, she just wants to show off in front of her crush. They watched as Chiron stood in the image sphere, openly talking behind her back. Anyway, what's she good at besides that? Athela said, try each form one by one. Just switch between the 4 forms in order. Chiron nodded, yes, ma'am. One of the criteria for being promoted to the next grade is proficiency in domain shifting. If I succeed now and get closer to moving up, the 4th grade students will be waiting to laugh at Chiron. Except for Amy and Cheryl, what's the difference? Chiron thought to himself, maybe I won't have to clash with the 7th grade anymore and can escape this situation. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and his domain immediately appeared in the space. First, it took the form of a defensive shield. Amy was surprised. Is it even stronger than when you fought the dark mage? A male student commented, it has 144 sides. This is already an advanced defensive form. The 7th grade students were silent, listening to others talk about Chiron. At this level, isn't it just like a giant armor wall? Then, Chiron's domain shifted into a star-like shape, and then it quickly morphed into a cross shape. Athela smiled. This student really has a solid foundation, and his shifting speed seems far better than the 7th graders. With this level of skill, moving up to the 4th grade should be no problem at all. Chiron stood in his domain, exhaling slowly. Although I really want to prove my successes, if I want to get advice from the professor, I need to show them my failures. His domain wavered. The 5th grade student stared confused. Did he just shift into the redirection form? Only 5th graders are allowed to try that. The 7th grade students furrowed their brows. Redirection form? Could it be? The key is, Chiron focused, shifting the core of his domain before it shrank completely and disappeared. He held his head, breathing heavily from the effort, feeling like he had used up a lot of energy, just like during his training. He could shift the focus of his domain, but it felt like the farther the domain moved from his body, the more his consciousness was pulled along with it. Chiron encouraged himself, let's do this again. The other students started to cover their mouths and laugh. Mean-spirited gossip began to spread, as if they had finally found an opportunity to bring Chiron down. What's he doing? Does he think he's a genius? So arrogant. How embarrassing. Doesn't he know what shame is? And yet, he still stands there. Chiron stood silently, his head lowered, while the others continued to mock him. It was still just the 4 basic forms. Amy spoke up. Hey, he's doing great. What's going on all of a sudden? Cheryl said. Look at Chiron's domain. She turned to Amy and asked, why is it shaking like that? Is he embarrassed because he's being noticed? Amy shook her head. No way. He's not the type of guy to be that weak. She muttered to herself, what's been going on with him lately? Chiron stood there with his head down. Why do people enjoy seeing others fail? Isn't it just that everyone wants to see him fall? Everyone had isolated him. Chiron began to doubt himself, as expected. Memories from his childhood kept replaying in his mind. I really don't belong here, do I? A voice suddenly spoke, causing Chiron to jump. You're overthinking it. The person continued, don't hesitate. Just do whatever you want to do. Chiron stayed silent, listening. Is it becoming a mage what you wanted? He was confused by the voice. Who was it? But then Chiron also came to his senses. Wait, hold on. What am I even thinking right now? He squeezed his eyes shut. His domain flared up strongly once again. I came here to become a mage. The students from the 4th grade stared wide-eyed at Chiron's domain. The 7th grade students, however, looked uncomfortable. Chiron stood within his own domain. He clenched his fists, trying to focus before it changed direction, before it disappeared. Shirone shouted out loud. Someone flipped through the accident report for that day involving a student. The report written by Sade explained that 6 students had tried to damage the victim's mind by excessively using anti-magic, a forbidden type of magic at the school. However, the 7th grade student Chiron had managed to control the anti-magic with a defensive form. The person reading the report thought to themselves, he fought against anti-magic with just a defensive form. One of the 4 basic forms, Saina, deep in thought, added, anti-magic is such a dangerous type of magic that even experts need to rely on artifacts for it. It's both difficult and risky. An artifact is an object imbued with magical power, so much so that even those who aren't mages can still use powers similar to magic. She was certain that those kids would never use anti-magic properly. But how could one person stand up to 6? Santa paused and thought Chiron's mental strength must be greater than the combined strength of all 6 of them. She couldn't help but sigh. She truly is a genius. Suddenly, someone called out, Miss Staina. Inside Saina's office, Saina asked Athela, has the transformation to the redirecting form been successful? Athela nodded. Yes, just yesterday, the boy started learning the 4 transformation methods. He's been at it for only a month. Athela continued, I've confirmed that the spirit domain was separated and vanished. It took about 4 seconds. Saina smiled happily. That's amazing. She picked up her tea and took a sip, thinking to herself, as expected, my judgment of people was spot on. Athela added, to motivate the students, I have some suggestions I'd like to share with the teachers. Saina adjusted her glasses. I'm guessing we're on the same page here. A few days later, during the 7th grade chemistry class, Saina had written an entire board full of chemical equations. She said, we'll stop the lesson here for today. The students sighed in relief, thank goodness. Saina continued, the reason I'm ending the lesson early is that I have an important announcement to make. She called out, Shirone, our new student, please stand up. He quickly stood, saying, yes. Saina said, Shirone will start moving up to 5th grade tomorrow. Her schedule will follow the 5th grade timetable, so try your best to adapt to it. The 7th grade students immediately started whispering excitedly. Did you hear? She's jumping 2 grades. That's impossible. Usually, it takes 2 years to move up 1 grade. All they could think was, which family is supporting her to get promoted by 2 grades? Saina picked up her book and was about to leave. I hope you all will work hard to achieve that too. See you. However, before she could leave, the short-haired girl who always disliked Chiron spoke up. Wait, I object. There's never been a case of jumping 2 grades at once. There's something fishy going on here. She raised her voice and asked, and why would a student who can't use any magic be promoted so early? Saina paused, thinking she can't use magic. She looked up at Chiron. Athela didn't mention this. Saina then asked, is that true? Chiron remained silent. Countless eyes in the class turned towards Chiron, all of them clearly thinking, it's obvious you don't have anything left. You can't go. You can't hurry. Chiron calmly answered, yes, I haven't been able to use any magic. Saina was a bit surprised and couldn't quite believe it. Even a simple, basic spell could be learned out of curiosity. Yet, she still said, there's no rule that says you need magic to level up, so it's not an issue. Just as Saina finished speaking, someone slammed their fist on the table loudly. The person who stood up was the tall guy who had been intentionally stirring up trouble and trying to turn everyone against Chiron. He couldn't accept it at all. He raised his voice. This is clearly favoritism. Did the teachers themselves say that the magic domain isn't everything when it comes to magic? Chiron stood there quietly listening to his accusations. The guy continued. What else is Chiron good at, aside from the magic domain? If he could even cast just one spell, I'd accept it. The 7th grade students felt like they had a point to stand on and eagerly started speaking up. That's right, if it's a competition based on casting spells, we're definitely better than him. Chiron won't be able to keep up with the theoretical lessons either. They looked at Saina. If she insisted on promoting him early, they threatened to bring it to the student council and hold a hearing. Saina stayed silent, clearly unaware of this situation. She then said, I understand your concerns. It seems I may have been a bit too hasty with this announcement, she added. We will make an official announcement after the teachers' meeting. The tall guy immediately smiled, having achieved his goal. Saina sat inside, gazing out the window. Why are the students acting like this? She wondered, deep in thought. It felt like their reaction wasn't just about protesting injustice. It was about something emotional, too. At that moment, someone entered, looking for Saina. Excuse me, Miss Saina. She turned and asked, what's going on, Maria? Maria hesitated for a moment before speaking up. It's about what happened earlier. I have something to say. Maria slowly began to explain. It all started a week ago. At first, we completely ignored Chiron. She recalled how lonely Chiron had looked. But a few days ago, people started openly talking badly about him, even throwing trash on his desk. Maria sat down in front of Saina and continued. They even started interfering with his studies. She broke down in tears. I've seen everything. I've watched him suffer from false rumors and attacks from everyone. The way they've been bullying him is just so unfair. Maria was shaking with emotion. I just can't stand it. Sena, now understanding, furrowed her brow. I see. Later, Sena said, "Thank you, Maria. You've done your best. Now let me handle this." In a book titled Outstanding Students, the physiologist Torkelin shared a profound thought. He said humans should sleep at least 6 hours a day for optimal health. He sighed and added, "Although I only slept 4 hours a day during my entire school life." The interviewer asked him, "Doesn't that contradict your own advice? Mr. Torkelin, you only slept 4 hours, but still became an outstanding student." Torkelin pointed and said, "Listen, teenagers are not just ordinary people. They're superheroes. No matter how much sleep they get or what they do, nothing affects them." The clock passed midnight and Shirone leaned back sighing. He looked around, noticing that the place was empty. Is it really that late? He thought. As he passed by a classmate leaving the library, Shirone nodded to greet her. Fortunately, she politely nodded back. Shirone walked alone outside the school grounds, with the crescent moon hanging high in the sky. He remembered Temuran's words, "Young master, once you enroll at the Magic Academy, countless nobles will look down on you. But no matter what, you must endure. If you can stick it out until the end, you'll reap the rewards." Shirone looked up at the sky and thought to himself, "I will definitely make it." He thought about the people who cared for him and made a firm decision. "I have to do this because they placed their trust in me." A few familiar images flashed through Shirone's mind. He gazed at the bright moon overhead, feeling determined. No matter who stands in my way, I will still become a magician. In his bedroom on the 3rd floor of the dormitory, Shirone had just finished showering when someone knocked on his door. He hesitated and glanced at the clock. It was already past 1 a.m. It's so late, he thought. Who could it be at this hour? Shirone suspected it might be the group of 7th grade students. Could it be them? He wondered. Then a voice called from outside. "Shirone, are you free?" Shirone opened the door to find Sena standing there. She asked, "Can I come in?" Shirone quickly nodded. Of course. He awkwardly poured tea for Sena. "Would you like some tea?" Sena gently declined. "No, thank you." She continued, "I was planning to come see you earlier, but you weren't in your room. I'm sorry for disturbing you so late." Sena looked around Shirone's room before asking, "Do you live here alone?" Sena noticed something odd when she glanced at Shirone's grades. Though his scores were low, they were all fairly consistent across subjects. She understands. It seems like he tried to improve his understanding in all areas at once instead of just achieving short-term results. He's studying for the future, not because he can't learn magic, but because he decided not to learn it. But why is he doing this now? Sena looked at Shirone. Could it be because he didn't get to go to school when he was younger? Shirone sat up straight in front of Sena, feeling shy and thinking, "I feel so embarrassed." The two sat across from each other. Shirone thought maybe it was because they weren't in class. Sena, on the other hand, kept her focus on Shirone. Although he always looked directly at her in class, he'd tell he was the type of person who got easily embarrassed. She spoke up and asked, "School life must be tough, right?" Shirone nodded. "Yes, but it's fun, and learning is really interesting." Sena said, "I heard that some of your classmates are bullying you." Shirone lowered his head. "I'm fine. You don't have to worry about me." Sena said seriously, "Tell me the truth. Don't hold back." Shirone nodded and said, "I'm really okay. Even though I'm a little sad, I can't make friends with anyone." A moment later, he looked up and said, "But I don't know what to do to make them stop hating me." Sena asked, "Don't you feel angry at them?" Shirone nodded again. "Of course I do. After all, I'm still human, even though I really want to have a good relationship with them." He calmly continued, "But I don't want to obsess over relationships to the point where I lose myself. Even if all the students in the 7th grade say I'm wrong, in the end, they're just 40 people. Shirone explained slowly to Sena, "I believe that somewhere in the world, there's someone who will understand me." Sena had an epiphany. "I understand now." She smiled and nodded at Shirone. "I get what you're saying. Shirone, I'll keep that in mind for the teacher being." Sena came to a conclusion. Shirone wants to be promoted to the next grade soon. Sena's serious, steady voice echoed through the teacher's meeting. "Therefore, I would like to conclude the announcement by suggesting that student Shirone should be promoted to a higher grade." The professors paused to think, and one spoke up. "Isn't this a bit sensitive?" In the meeting room of Alfia's Academy of Magic, the professors began to murmur. Are we really going to let a whole group of students bully one student just because they can't use magic? The teaching staff for intermediate level classes often sees this kind of thing happen in the lower grades. These classes usually have a lot of younger children mixed with a few older students who lack talent. On top of that, the skill gap between students at this level is often huge. One teacher said, "This means Shirone should be promoted as soon as possible." From the student's perspective, he should graduate in 4 years. Sena sat down, continuing, from the school's perspective, he should graduate early. The sooner, the better. However, Thad spoke up. I disagree. Alfia's turned to him. You disagree? He looked at Thad and asked, what's your reason? Thad replied, I know Shirone is a genius, but the problem is he can't use magic, and I believe we can't overlook his weak theoretical scores either. Sena, frustrated, said, as I mentioned earlier, the issue with Shirone's grades is because he's studying all subjects at once. He's dragging out his magical studies. As a teacher, we shouldn't interfere with the student's personal learning method. I'm not questioning his approach. Thad frowned. The problem is that you're showing too much concern for Shirone, Miss Sena. Sena's lips twitched. What did you just say? Thad explained, while other students may be weaker than Shirone in terms of overall ability, they're still stronger than him when it comes to intellect. This decision could make the other students feel like failures and discourage their motivation to learn. He smirked. A teacher shouldn't focus only on the genius and forget about the other students, right? Sena shouted, you're not just trying to ruin the future of a talented student, but you also fail to see the unhealthy jealousy in these children. Thad and Sena both slammed their hands down on the table with a loud bang. The other teachers sighed, holding their heads. Here they go again. How can their personalities be so completely opposite? The other professors looked at Sena, whose 6th level certification clashed with Thad's. Their reactions were like oil and water, and they couldn't believe these two could become mages. Alfia's waved his hand. Enough, you two. Go back to your seats. The old man said both of them have their own perspectives. Sena's view is very meaningful, but Thad's opinion also makes sense. He's concerned about the overall balance of the school, and I believe that comes from his love for the students. Alfia's continued, he means well. I understand that. We need to consider the usual emotional tendencies of the students. Thad nodded. That's exactly what I wanted to say, Principal. Sena listened to Alfia's. Instead of reacting, the old man smiled. Why do we do this? The next morning, the students were bustling in and out. Everyone quickly ran toward the front, gathering excitedly around the bulletin board for the intermediate class. What's going on? Someone asked. On the board was an announcement about the promotion exam. Due to numerous complaints regarding the early promotion decision, the school had decided to give all 7th grade students the opportunity to be promoted. The promoted student would be selected based on the criteria below. All students involved were advised to take note. It was important to note that the early promotion would be determined through an exam. Only one student would be promoted, and that student would be directly advanced to the 5th grade. The subjects for the exam would be magic and spells, with instant teleportation being the chosen skill for evaluation. The problem with evaluating students based solely on their subject area has been resolved. As a result, the school has decided to change the evaluation criteria to using the teleportation spell taught in the 5th grade. Someone loudly said, surely all the 7th grade students will be taking the promotion exam. They've made a lot of noise. If you pass the test, you'll jump up 2 grades and go straight to 5th grade. This teleportation spell, do you know how to use it? Someone responded, of course not. That's the spell taught in 5th grade. The 7th graders were left confused. The theory sounds simple, so the practice can't be that hard, right? But one boy shouted, simple. Are you kidding? A senior I know had to be hospitalized after making a mistake while practicing it. Another student asked, then how are we supposed to do it? Are they seriously not planning to let anyone in our class get promoted?